Thank you very much. Welcome. Today is Tuesday, September 30th. It is 6:30 p.m. and we are gathered for a study session for the Town of Erie Board of Trustees. We will dive right into our discussion topics. The first item on the agenda is a preliminary analysis of the Erie housing stock and affordability challenges. I believe that's being presented to us by Ms. Ariel Tolfree. Ms. Tolfree, are you prepared?
Yes, I am. I can go ahead and get started.
Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to, I, as well as my consultants, are going to be talking about affordability in Erie as well as our housing needs assessment. I have Thomas Eddington, Jeff Egan, and I lost him. Where'd he go? Charles. I was like, Charles Buki, there we go. And Charles Buki, who are going to be discussing today different things. Again, this is preliminary information, and the full document is due to us at the end of this month, early next month. But they are going to be answering a lot of the questions that I think that we have. And Thomas, I will give it over to you.
Thanks, Ariel. Thanks, Mayor and Board of Trustees. We're excited to be here tonight. I apologize. Our colleague Eric is under the weather right now, and so I will try to do as well as he would have done, given his knowledge of this housing information, etc. Ariel, I think, am I sharing the screen or do you share the screen? I think I do, right?
Yes, you're going to.
Okay, bear with me for 1 second. Okay, I'm going to line this up. I'm on a new screen right now.
And we can see it perfectly.
Okay, let me just shrink that in a little bit. And are you seeing everything okay clearly now?
Yep. Great.
Okay. So again, as Ariel noted, we're here to walk you through some of our preliminary findings, some of the research and analysis that we've been able to do to date regarding the housing needs assessment and affordable housing strategy. I will try to walk you through all of this tonight. Please feel free. We're really casual. This is a work session. So if there's something you want to ask a question about, don't hesitate to jump in. And I'm hoping that my colleagues Charles and Jeff will jump in as well and provide more detail if there is something that I move too quickly through. We wanted to walk through 3 primary issues today. Much of this was in the preliminary analysis that was delivered to you a couple of weeks ago. Certainly the preliminary data, we want to discuss the 12% goal implications as part of your partnership with the Boulder County Regional Housing Partnership, and start to touch on some of the potential tools to address affordable housing. Again, today is a work session. What we're doing is informal. We're hoping for some discussion back and forth. You know, this is not about making a decision relative to strategy or housing tools, et cetera. It's really kind of a discussion opportunity and an opportunity for us to get feedback that you all feel is important relative to this project. As we walk through this tonight, we're hoping that there are a couple of questions that you would consider and think about what you think is important relative to the community housing project. And again, don't hesitate to ask us questions as we walk through this. As we get toward the end of the presentation, there was kind of a series of tools that we'll walk through. We hope that you will again provide input relative to those tools as well. To date, we have really been digging deep into the data and analysis. At this point, we're about halfway through the project. Our next meeting with you will be in November. And between now and then, we'll really take a deep dive into the analysis based upon your input tonight. We'll start to craft tools that you think are appropriate and really kind of get into some of the desired outcomes relative to affordable housing in the community. What we'll do now is walk through some of the characteristics of Erie households. We've kind of got these kind of title slides strategically placed throughout here. If there are any questions up to this point, certainly, again, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we'll get into some of the specifics and the data. So, by comparison with Boulder County, Weld County in the United States, you can see that the town of Erie is essentially a homeowner community. It's got a relatively low rate of rental housing, about 15%. That's about half as much as the region in general, again, being Boulder and Weld County. And you can see it's significantly lower than the nation as a whole. This, of course, does contribute to increased cost for homeowners, given that single-family housing is so much more expensive. As you look at household income, you can also see that the town of Erie is about double where the United States median household income is. You can also see that it's about, depending, 25 to 40% more than Weld County and Boulder County. So at 124,000 as a median household income, it's a significant income market. You can also see that the median family income for married couples, et cetera, is a little bit higher than the median household income. Pretty typical of markets in the United States.
How do they define one versus the other, household versus family?
Household is just household can be made up of unrelated folks. It can be made up of it can be roommates, etc. The family income is typically married couples, partner couples.
Recording.
Okay.
Trustee Harrison's got his hand up.
Thank you. So quick question for you. Obviously, we have Erie as the town, Mr. Eddington, and Boulder County as a county and Weld County as a county. Obviously, populations are different. Can you extrapolate in regard to what that is on a even keel comparison between that, given if we were to say Erie reached a population of X similar to them, what would it be like?
So if you maintained the same trajectory, you would continue to have higher household incomes than the county the counties, I should say, as a whole. So if you maintained your current trajectory, you're about 88 to 90% single family households. And so that tends to equate to a higher household income. So if you maintain that trajectory, and that is primarily the product that you would build out over the next 5, 10, and 20 years, you probably maintain this trajectory. You would continue to see higher household incomes. If you diversified that product, you of course would probably start to see incomes that were maybe at 60 and 80% of area median income, of your area median income, that would be lower. Maybe that could be affordable housing. I'm sorry, that could be multifamily housing. That could be towns or quads, plexes in neighborhoods that might be a little bit lower.
Okay, and then the follow-up question is, in regard to other peer communities outside of, say, closest Boulder, Lafayette, et cetera, or maybe Lafayette, do you have any data in terms of how do we compare to local communities, or is there other communities in the Denver area, say Castle Rock, something that might be similar, going through a huge growth increase like we are? Is there something that is there somewhat comparable?
You know what, I'll let Charles and or Jeff jump in on this because they're probably much more familiar with your local market. But what I would say is this: you're generally higher than most of your peer communities, just given your relatively small population and the fact that you are generally single family product. But I'll let Charles or Jeff jump in. I know Jeff has a lot of relative to your local area.
Thank you, appreciate it.
To Jeff Yegan here. To give you a comparison point, Boulder has lower household and family incomes than Erie. There are a lot of students here, and that is not factored out of the census calculations that give us this. So in terms of data, I would also wonder which most, Boulder and other communities have typically a list of peer communities that you use to evaluate policy choices and the like. And which are your peer communities in Colorado, for example?
I would say probably obviously what's local around us would be Lafayette. Probably Superior is a little smaller than us. Well, yeah, they're definitely smaller than us, but Lafayette, probably same population, right, Mayor? Somewhere around similar. And then I would say on the flip side, probably down on the south side of Denver, say Castle Rock.
Yeah.
Those areas might be somewhat similar as well.
Well, Thomas continues. I'll take a quick look and see what I can find for you on that. I don't know them off the top of my head.
All right, thank you. That's all I have right now.
No,
You've
thank
got Louisville at about 116 on median household, so it's right there. And Lafayette's sitting, I think, at about 85. So Lafayette's more comparable to the median across Boulder County. But
And Louisville,
they're all
many-
high.
yeah, what's the population of Louisville? Is it similar to ours?
Let me check real quick.
Okay, thanks.
23,000.
I think that's a little less than us. Okay,
Little, you guys, yeah.
all right. Thank you. I appreciate it. It puts it in kind of a perspective.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good questions. Thanks. Anybody else have questions? If not,
And Castle Rock, just as a point of comparison, is at 113,000 for household income.
Okay. And thank you.
probably no surprise to you all that, high income is true for the household homeowners as well as the rental income. They're relatively high compared to your region, compared to the United States. And so both markets, albeit again, keep in mind your rental market is about 15% of your total market, relatively small, is still significantly higher than that around you, and about 25% higher than Boulder and Weld counties. So a significant increase. Clearly, there is a correlation between education and income, and the population of the town of Erie certainly has about double where the US is in terms of bachelor's degrees, and about double in terms of advanced degrees as well. Also, both generally higher than Weld County, but on par with Boulder County. You have a university there, certainly it maintains higher numbers, but again, significantly higher than the nation as a whole. So as we start to get into affordability, we wanted to walk through some kind of measures of how affordability is determined. Certainly, HUD defines affordability as a household spending less than 30% of their household income. That household income should be noted that 30% includes utilities and household costs. And so if it's less than 30%, you're not cost burdened. If it's over 30%, you're cost burdened. And so roughly a third of every dollar going toward housing is generally the accepted kind of rule of thumb. If we were to look at that in terms of what could a household spend, you could start to see that affordability is relative. It's a moving target. It's not an absolute measure. And so if you're a family, if you're a household earning $50,000, you can afford about $1,250 a month for rent or mortgage, plus your utilities. You can start to see at $150K, you're getting up near close to $4,000 a month in terms of affordability. Beyond that, you would start to be cost burdened. And again, keeping this in perspective with regard to the town of Erie, you're just under the 150K, you're at about 138 as your median. So,
And Mr. Eddington, those housing costs, that would include utilities and things like that as well?
yes, that's correct. The way HUD defines it, it is housing costs. So rent, mortgage, utilities, etc. Yeah. Any other questions there?
Matt, go back to that slide, Mr. Eddington, if you can.
Sure.
So to put it in perspective for people, obviously we like to do it in real terms. And that is for a home that is $1,250 a month in mortgage. What, and assuming you put 20% down, just to average, right? What they expect to do when you buy a home, how much is that in an actual price of a home?
How much
Well,
house could
it's going to depend on the interest rate and the terms of the mortgage. So it depends on how quickly you're amortizing, the principal. So if you give me a second,
Average.
I'll pencil that out for
just-
you at 6.5%. So just give me a second.
Yeah, and that's what today's mortgage is right around, right? After
5
the last-
3/4. But if you're putting 5% down and you have a first and a second,
Right.
so just give me a second.
I just want to put it in realistic terms for people to understand when they're coming to purchase a home, what that cost of a home really is. The mayor might know, he's a math genius. He's an engineer.
he's already got it figured out.
Well,
Yes.
I actually thought I saw it in somewhere in the packet. They had some examples.
Yeah, I couldn't remember, but
Yeah,
What was the mortgage payment, the principal and interest? I'm sorry.
let's call it 1250 as the.
yeah,
lower
1250.
bound,
Say we go with 1250.
Probably sub 200,000.
Probably around, I'm guessing 175, give or take, depending how much you put down. Yeah.
And that's for 50,000. And then you talk to 75,000.
So at 5 3/4 over 30 years, it's a $214,000 house, excluding homeowners insurance and excluding your taxes. So, depending on the mill rate and the homeowner's policy. And then you can assume, conventionally, let's see. So somebody's going to need to walk in the door with $11,000 in cash plus closing costs. So let's say you have to have somebody at $15,000 cash, and then they'll get a first mortgage and a second mortgage, which will total, to roughly $1,250 total, plus insurance and taxes. And so if that's what you're
Yep.
talking about, then that's about $45,000 to $50,000 in household income, or the income that it would take to qualify. So the way we
Right.
would think about that, trustee, is you take that $45,000, $50,000 and you ask yourself, what's its relationship to the $215,000 sale price? And that
Mhm.
ratio, in that 3-to-1, 4-to-1 range, puts it in striking distance. When you see that number 214, as in the case of Erie, hike up to 670, 870, 970 for single family detached, your ratios now are at 8-to-1, 9-to-1, 10-to-1, 11-to-1, 12-to-1. You're in some pretty high altitude space at that stage.
Mhm.
Once you're in that stage, 5% of $1 million as a down payment that's considerable cash.
Exactly.
And I think even thinking practically from an application standpoint, at that price range, I think there might be condos on the south end of town that might fit in that range, but I believe the last I checked, they were at least 100,000 over that. So
Right.
it's
And-
the
Your
I can see-
condos are hovering in the 340, 350 range, actually. Yeah, it may be dropping a little now, but they're pretty high.
so there's I don't know of any inventory in town that's
Right.
anywhere close to 2 and change.
Exactly.
So-
And the income to that, an average, I'll just give an example. My fellow trustees know my personal background. My wife is a teacher or was a teacher. Her income was $68,000 a year as a teacher with 2 master's degrees. So if you're putting that below between the $50,000 and $75,000, she would have to come up with a big chunk of change, save a lot of money to even pay for a mortgage that's around maybe $1,400, maybe $1,600 a month, right? So spitballing it, that's a lot of money with not a lot left over.
Backing up for a moment there, you're saying, so 5%, you're talking FHA lending. So, but you mentioned a first and a second, is that to avoid PMI or?
Yeah, that would be the typical approach on,
Okay,
yeah, otherwise your first is larger, but you do have private mortgage insurance, which then reduces your ability to borrow principal.
okay, gotcha.
No monthly cost.
Yep,
Thank you
thanks.
very much for that mathematical analysis. I like putting things in realistic perspective for people to really understand what they're talking about here. So thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we move on? All right, what we'll do is jump into some data that kind of ties this affordability to the town of Erie. So if you take a look at this, you can see, we noted this earlier, that about 90% of the housing stock in Erie is single family detached units. Pretty much that defines the housing market in the community right now. You can see by comparison, it's significantly higher than that of the region, including Weld County, that has a relatively high single family unit percentage. Again, that creates an affordability block for many households. In kind of looking at the 150K, again, right around just a little bit above the 100% of area median income, you could start to see how expensive the market actually is. So if you look at Erie over the course of between 2021 and 2022, you can see that the housing units have gone up pretty significantly, more than $100,000. You can see that that's about 20% year over year. And, you know, we were actually, as we were kind of creating the slide, we were thinking, well, you know, maybe the market will soften a little bit, you know, given interest rates, et cetera. But, you know, honestly, as we run the numbers, even if you were to see a $50,000 decrease in the 808 number, it's still a very unaffordable housing market. And so it is a significant barrier to entry for most homeowners. As you take a look at this, this is an assessment. I should be clear. This is an American Community Survey from the U.S. Census. Kind of, it's a self-reported value assessment. If you take a look at this, the percent of units affordable at or below $150,000 of household income. Again, just a little above your 100% of AMI, which is about 140. You could see that only 48% of the units are actually even affordable to those at median income. If we were to, and we're starting to dig into it a little bit more, if we were to dig into the MLS data, the realtor data, this number would be significantly lower as we actually look at actual for sale product and what it actually sold at. I'm sure that this number would drop significantly.
And this, I assume, is assuming that individuals are sticking to that golden rule of 30% of their household income goes to living expenses, correct?
That's correct. It's typically, it's staying with that 30% or 1/3 kind of number. Yeah, 1/3 of income, give or take.
With one qualification, it's not so much that the household is sticking to it, it's that the underwriting will stick to it. And so a lender's not going to put out more than, you know, a 28% front end ratio or a 40 to 43% back end ratio, depending on the amount of revolving credit a household has. So no matter what the household wants to do, unless they're paying cash for a house, there's no lender in America that's insured that will lend them beyond what works out to be essentially 30% of their gross monthly income.
So as we take a look at rental units, this represents all housing units in each of these stacks. So in each of these, in Weld County, Boulder County, Broomfield, and then of course Erie, this represents all of your housing units. And so you could take a look at Weld County, for example, rental units at or below a household income of 50K or about 16% of the units. You could see that between about 50K and 75,000, it's about 8%. And then everything beyond that is above 70 $75,000. It's worth noting we chose $75,000 because roughly in Erie, that's about 60% of your area median income. So that starts to kind of define an area of affordability, that 60 to 100, 120% that most communities can start to address without, digging into state subsidy, without digging into federal subsidies, HUD dollars, low-income housing tax credits, et cetera. So as we look at Erie, again, you have only 15% of your units are affordable, but of all your units, it's only 3% that would actually be affordable to somebody to a household making less than $75,000, or about 60% of their immediate income. It's a small slice of the pie. And sticking with that $75,000 kind of line, our research really indicated that is a dividing line. It is 60% of AMI, which is kind of an easy number to use in terms of affordability. It's also indicative of a line in your community that really illustrates those who have to pay more than 30% of their income on housing. Even for owners, it's up at 60. I'm sorry, for the owners, it's up at 9%, and up at the rentals, you're getting up at 85% of those families have to pay more than 30% of their income. And again, I'm sorry, for owners, it's 60% if you make less than $75,000. 60% of those folks who own a home are cost burden. 85% for the rental units. So as part of the regional housing approach that you guys have joined forces with, the goal to reach 12% permanently affordable housing is a pretty ambitious goal. And so you can see from this chart, if you were to maintain a building permit pace of about 300 units annually, you would need to have 40% of all of the new units income restricted in some way. We'll talk about the tools, whether it's inclusionary zoning, you're building it, you're working with partners, Habitat, other partners, et cetera. But 40% of all of that new housing would need to be income restricted to maintain your 12% goal. Just for comparison, over the course of the past decade, 12 years or so, you've averaged about maybe 450 building permits a year. And so if we were to use that number, what kind of between the 300 and the 500 here, you'd be right around 31, 32, 33% of all units if you maintain current pace. All future units would need to be income restricted to maintain or to reach the 12% permanently affordable goal. Even if, I think this was in the preliminary assessment that we sent you, even if you stopped all market growth, which you wouldn't do, but assuming that you did, you stopped it right now with your 11-ish thousand units, you would need to provide about 1,400 units of housing to reach the 12% goal. It's a pretty steep slope. It's significant. Charles, do you have anything else on that? I know we discussed it a little bit earlier.
Just to underscore, those are really aggressive. Those are aggressive clawback rates. Those are very aggressive ambitions, and so that's something you'll want to think about. And so even if your ambition was to solve that at modest to moderately high densities to reduce land per unit costs, to reduce some of the size of the units, to reduce your hard costs, to streamline your permitting process, to reduce soft costs, to self-finance some of it, to reduce some of your financing. Even if you did all of that, 40% of X is a big number. And at a $300,000, let's say $200,000 to $300,000 per unit subsidy on the capital side, you could be looking at having to find $20 to $40 million a year. So that's a lot of money to be thinking about. And so I'm not I'm not suggesting those aren't goals worthy of aspiring to, but those are steep clawback curves.
So Charles, to that point, and Thomas, realistically, with the amount of capital, et cetera, all that you would need to do, if you were to have it to 6%, that would still be moderately high and hard to do as well, correct?
If you had it at 6% goal.
It's say 6% goal, yeah. It would still be high, but 12% is really high.
I'd probably defer to Jeff to have a sense that, like, as you get closer to 5 and 6%, how much, how practicable that rate would be. So Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, just on the surface, you could have the percent of all new units. So you're looking at 20% at 300 a year, 15% at 500 a year. So that's certainly within the realm of, fairly aggressive, but still functional inclusionary housing regimes that other communities have done, especially high cost, high income communities. There are other approaches besides just looking to new units. Converting an existing unit to an affordable unit is a capital question for the most part, and you're probably looking at 300,000 a unit. Let's just use that as a ballpark. That's a pretty stiff amount of subsidy to come up with, and at 10 a year, that's $3 million. So that's pretty substantial. Now, other approaches to trying to reach a goal quickly would be to work with partners that specialize in providing affordable housing that can bring outside capital in, like tax credits or grants. To do that, they're going to need the ability to build a fairly significant project in terms of numbers, not a dozen or 20, but probably upwards of 30, 40, 50 units. And they're going to want those units to be smaller and attached, and they may want to serve specialized populations, all of which can bring in capital. So that could, a fully developed affordable housing program is going to be trying to tackle this using all kinds of resources and different policies, a whole bunch of tools. So, up here we've kind of highlighted, because you do have a fair amount of new construction, what that looks like, but there are a variety of other options that would make sense as well.
And finding the partners, I think that's the challenge, is finding the partners and the developers, et cetera, that have that as their values of being able to build inclusionary, affordable homes. Will probably be different than I would suspect, probably somewhat different than the current builders we probably have in Erie, I would expect. Correct, Sarah? I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I would say that there are a significant, there's not as many builders that are mission driven like that, or just nonprofits themselves, but they do exist. I would say even if we look at them building rental units, we'd still probably be participating in those projects in some way, shape, or form. It helps to position them if they want LIHTC dollars, like low-income housing tax credits, and those are competitive processes within the state, that it does help when position a project to get those. If a town or jurisdiction is involved in some way, so I think there's but it's not, I would say, to the extent of $200,000 to $300,000 a unit. I think you can get more bang for your buck if you're looking at rental and then in combination with, these developers.
Yeah, there are several sophisticated, active, nonprofit and for-profit developers in the metro area, and especially in Boulder County, that are always looking for projects. So they have to be able to make it work on the development side, which typically means, as Sarah pointed out, rental projects, smaller units, and multifamily construction fairly tight with land costs being what they are. The math for you with your plant investment fees and water fees is going to be challenging from what I understand. If there's probably very difficult from a financial perspective to offset or subsidize those directly. So you'd want to be looking at land use decisions primarily to kind of address that. And land use comes with substantial political lift typically. So it's a complicated situation that requires a big investment of effort and money by a variety of parties to really make progress.
Agreed, totally understand. And that's the challenge. So thank you.
So when we talk about these price points that we're trying to hit, trying to be irrespective of the AMI, what kind of square footage are we looking at for these either rental properties or properties for individuals to purchase?
So you can look at what the Boulder County Housing Authority is producing, for example. They're usually talking 600-700 for a 1-bedroom, under 1,000 for 2, 1,200 to 1,400 for 3 bedrooms when they're doing family housing. If you're working with a more specialized population, you might get even smaller unit sizes in some cases. Some of the senior housing projects might be even a little bit smaller than that. And certainly if there are any kind of transitional housing, you might see smaller than that. So they'll be attached units pretty much exclusively. Now, Habitat for Humanity is a different story. They tend to target families with modest ownership opportunities they probably go, they work on a site-specific and development-specific approach, but 1,000 to 1,400 probably. That'd be for a 3-bedroom usually.
And we're talking about multi-dwelling units, so we're talking about very high density developments, essentially.
I might not use the word very high density because, I would put a number to it and then leave it to you to sort of put the verbiage on it. So, at $29, $30, $31, $32 a square foot, you're getting into land cost territory independent of land development costs where, now you're looking at $2,200 a month break even rent on an 825 square foot, 1.5 bedroom, 1.5 bath, 2-bedroom apartment. So your densities are probably 38 to 43, 44 units an acre. Some folks would say so I would leave it to you to put the verbiage on it. I think some folks in the metropolitan area would say when you're in the 70 and 80 units an acre, now you're at high densities. And then when you're in the high 30s, low 40s, you're at moderate density, but you'd know best what the language would be.
For Ms. Normello, what is our current classification of high density here in the town?
We're at 20 to 25, depending on where the high density is located.
Okay.
So in relation to our current UDC, our comprehensive plan, it is very high density. It is higher than the high density that we'd be looking at. And obviously then we would have to find the properties that we could actually do something like this and obviously make it so that, if you will, we're getting bang for the buck because land prices are very high right now and construction costs are very high. And
is there a different classification for housing density for places like Blue Sky that's built more like an apartment complex, those condos or Overlook, are those just considered high density? There's got to be more than 30 units per square foot per acre.
I mean, if they're 2 and 3 story kind of walk up projects, you're looking at around in the 20s.
Still, okay.
So because you have a lot of open space and it's surface parks, you use up a lot of land with those.
Okay.
When we get into areas that might develop, like the Gateway area, where we might be looking at more mixed use development. Maybe we're getting up to 4 and 5 stories in some cases there, and it's a much tighter, denser product out there. There may be some opportunities to have some a little bit higher density further west, but we're always going to be challenged, when we get into structured parking, like how much that costs and really how dense we're willing to get. But I think there's still a lot of opportunity, even in the lower density categories, to make progress with multifamily product types and affordable housing.
I would just add also, Sarah, your construction costs, first, second quarter, go back to third quarter, 2021, through this year, they're going to be in the $175 to $200 a square foot range. And so once you get into that kind of space, even a small 700 square foot unit, is going to have hard costs, $130,000 before you're financing it, before we're adding land costs, before we're adding common area, before we're adding parking, and so it gets to be a big number fast.
Yeah, I was Ariel, you heard when we brought in the developers in our stakeholder meeting, you heard from a lot of for-profit and nonprofit affordable housing developers, and you were hearing some comments on how construction costs were impacting them.
Yeah, basically they're, just like everyone said, construction costs are really, really expensive. So with that, they're having to price the houses more to kind of keep up with all of that. So that's definitely something that we want to keep in mind. And just like Charles said, like construction costs, and then we're talking about water, and then we're talking about parking, then we're talking about all these things. So understanding that the number is high, but just to go back to high density for a little bit, that's not to say that all of our products have to be extremely high density. I think we can still have good impact if we have smaller density and, do some infill development and have smaller developments within the town. So just wanted to make sure I put that point in there.
So
Thanks
if we're not talking about, having basically all high density, and we look at that 12% goal that we have for 2035, is there a goal that is, for lack of a better word, more realistic that we can look to as something that is attainable, instead of basically we need 30 to 40% of all of our housing units to be the types of housing that are what we would consider, because of our current makeup of the town, ultra high density?
I haven't thought of necessary. Oh, sorry.
I was going to offer that we adopted the 12% as our long-term goal. We certainly should set waypoints or intermediate targets that are shorter. At this point, we've achieved 0. And so getting started is the first step is to get some progress towards that. I don't think that our very first project would be 40% all on one plot of land for the year. I think that would be extremely ambitious and short-sighted. So I think it's going to take a lot of different types of product and projects and partnerships to get there. And we very likely will have more than one going at the same time. But I am a fan of setting an intermediate target, 12% by 2035, going from 0 to 12%. What this chart tells me is it can be exasperating and intimidating. And so we do need to slice the elephant up a little bit if we're going to eat it.
And I can certainly come up with some shorter term goals to make sure that we can at least attempt to hit those. But something along the lines of what you said, Mayor Brooks, I think it's important that we try and we do anything, because we are at 0. So even if we can't hit that 12%, if we do 2% in 5 years, like we've done so much more. And that's a lot of households that we were able to help and bring into the community than we were able to before. I'd hope to get a little bit higher than that, but just, as an example, I'd still like to push to do as much as we can.
And I'll also mention that I took a presentation recently on an upcoming, I believe it's a Senate Bill 123 that puts 3% as like the mark of progress for a municipality. So if you can increase your affordable housing stock by 3% in a year, that's considered excellent and makes you more competitive. So to put it in perspective, 12% at one shot, we're not going to get there. And I don't think any of us pretend to think that's going to happen, but we certainly want to make progress.
Agreed.
So going back a moment to and I was wondering this when I read through the presentation, but the fact we're starting at 0, and I guess I'm curious in our evaluation is our only factor that it has to have a deed restriction on it currently to count towards this number? Because we have, I mean, there's a number of things in town that we have that are lower income housing. I mean, there's we have some mobile homes. There's I'm trying to think. There's
that was in our packet too.
condos.
There are 50 mobile homes in town, I think was in the packet. And I think the qualifier for the definition of permanently affordable would be it's in some sort of program where your income qualified to get into it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's just cheap
okay.
because of, it doesn't mean it's cheap just because of the type of product. It means it's covered by one of those HUD
So
programs, I want to say.
it's something that we'd want to be able to keep track of because there are naturally occurring affordable homes, and like the mobile homes, for instance, are something it's naturally occurring that it is less expensive. But it's something that we need to be able to track better. So whether or not it's in a program or we understand it or they've gotten a subsidy would be what we're counting towards that number, just because naturally occurring affordable homes can be more expensive if someone else were to buy it or something like that. So we would lose that number very easily.
Yeah, so one of the I was actually talking to a developer at one point. One of the suggestions that they were giving to us was that we kind of take account of some of those mobile homes and other naturally occurring lower income housing, and that there's some things that we can do to protect that. I think she mentioned Thornton had done something similar. I'm not exactly certain what she was referring to, but that there are ways to help protect from, say, if like especially in a mobile home park, because you could have somebody that owns the property come in and somebody new come in and buy it and then raise everyone's rates, and so there are ordinances that we can have to help protect some of those things.
Yes,
Yeah,
certainly.
there's different zoning and different things we can do specifically for mobile home parks to keep it there. So, but that would be dependent on what the board would want and, our code, and making sure that that's all in alignment to make sure everyone is okay with doing that, and putting specifically like mobile home zoning or manufactured housing zoning on that land versus I think most of them are at medium density right now.
Sure. Okay.
And I want to also point out too, our permanently affordable goal, I believe, was inclusive of all types of affordable housing. So there's what HUD defines as affordable housing, which has a certain AMI restriction and definition, and then there's attainable housing, which has its own definition. And either of those, I believe, would be appropriate to count towards our goal. And someone with an AMI of 120% of 120% AMI would still qualify for the attainable housing programs. So we're not just talking the lowest spectrum of people who can afford a home. It goes up pretty high. We're talking significant incomes, well over 6 figures, which are still burdened and unable to purchase in the current standard market that we have here.
Yeah, according to the state, as of this year, they wrote it into many of the housing bills. Affordability could be for people making up to 140% AMI, depending on where you're at. So I think for us, if we were to include attainable housing, which would be probably around the 80 to 120% range, that would count towards our goal, because we are missing middle income housing. So I think that would go well towards our goal.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say along that line, you guys are hitting on all the right topics. I mean, it really is a housing ladder at the end of the day, and more typical than not, it is between maybe 60% of AMI up to 120%. Maybe it's a little, maybe there's some room on the edges as well. But I think you're absolutely right. You're really trying to look at housing that somebody can afford at about 3.5 times, 4 times their salary, right? And so if somebody were at maybe $100,000, is there an opportunity for maybe higher density housing, maybe cottage housing that they can afford in the $400,000 range, for example, or some of the condos or townhouses that you have 350, 380. So I think you're thinking on the right track, and it kind of is that housing ladder, that tiered approach. So it's exactly how we're thinking about it as well early on.
So I just had a question. So I know that we got here because basically we have all this single family residential or single family dwellings, not much diversity of housing. If we were to, so right now our UDC says that they have to have a variation of housing within the development, but it doesn't say when it occurs. So most of them put it at the end. And that's why we're now seeing some of these triplexes, townhomes, duplexes kind of things come in. If we were to not enforce, but basically push developers to have this higher density up front instead of entirely at the end, would this potentially affect the average sale price, the attainability for housing here in the town to help as a mixture? I know we're talking about the affordable and attainable housing side, but is there something else that we can be doing, not just specific to the affordable housing side, to benefit the potential affordable housing side?
I might, if I'm understanding your question, I might use because I live 24 hours a day in sports analogies, I might just revert to a sports analogy, which is even with construction costs where they are and mortgage rates where they are, you've got a very sophisticated development community in the region, really sophisticated. And they likely have the expectation that you are going to be a public sector negotiating partner who wants a mixed income outcome. So they're not going to be surprised that Erie is assuming that posture. Should you wish to do that? And I think the way to think about it is the combination of their sophistication, their access to capital, is going to put them on about the 15 or 10 yard line, but they're not going to get into the end zone without help. And so what you want to do is create a package of incentives that help them get into the end zone on the condition that they perform according to certain requirements. And one of your requirements can be, I want my project front loaded with the affordable product at the front end. Before you file for bankruptcy 7 years into the deal, I want my affordable product done. If you file for bankruptcy after that, I don't care, but I want my affordable housing projects in first. Then what they're going to do is they're going to react to that. They're going to look at their own math, and they're going to say, okay, I can put it up front, and this is what I need. And it'll smooth out their financing. So you can expect that it will be back and forth a few times until you get to a number, right? They're going to want to be in the end zone, but they're going to need help. And they're going to get close. You've got a really good development community at your disposal, but you're going to have to help them get there.
I'll just add that I'll call it best practice, which might be a bit of a stretch since I'm not sure how many communities actually do it, and whether it's industry-wide or not, but would be to require concurrent production in proportions of affordable and market rates. Now the developers have to finance their projects. It's very challenging to finance a project when there's no return from market rate units for a couple of years if you have to produce a fair amount of affordable first. And that adds risk. So I haven't seen very many communities go beyond concurrent proportional production for that reason. So I'll just throw that in the mix.
I'd add on that concurrent production also, from a land use perspective, allows some affordable housing, different unit typology to be interspersed throughout the development rather than in one location. And so it's got both a community character, a land use component to it, as well as a financial component. Any other questions? You guys are teeing this up very nicely for the next section, which is tools. So thank you for doing that. So we'll walk through the next few slides are really a discussion of some of the tools that we've kind of touched on to this point, but also maybe we'll give it a little bit more color, a little bit more detail. Inclusionary zoning, I think you are all pretty familiar with inclusionary zoning. Keep in mind, inclusionary zoning is basically a tool to regulate the private market and require a defined percent of new housing to be affordable. The state law in Colorado certainly allows for inclusionary zoning. You've seen it used in other communities. You can also incentivize inclusionary zoning. So you could create a bit of a tiered approach with regard to percents if that were something that you were interested, but it is an effective method to get some affordable workforce housing. Keep in mind, it's only as effective as is the private market. If you put that number too high, you could start to stymie some development. If you put it too low, you don't achieve the goals that you intended to achieve. Financial incentives. This could be in the form of cash assistance. This could be grants or loans. Keep in mind, something in this form would really be kind of a line item in the town's budget, right? You would have to actually budget for something like this. I think that Ariel's doing some work right now with acquisition and deed restrictions for units to start to get you all there. This costs money, obviously. And so when you think about it, as kind of, you'd almost have to think of housing as infrastructure, community infrastructure, right? This becomes a line item in your budget. You also have the opportunity to help developers on the front end with regard to fee reductions, maybe building permit fee reductions if they provide a certain percent of affordability. Maybe it's fee reductions for planning applications. Maybe there are other discounts. I mean, some communities start to think about abatements and other incentives for developers to move forward, but those are opportunities up front as the development community starts to address the affordable housing issue, whether by incentive or requirement, depending which way you're looking to approach it. Certainly, regulatory changes can become an effective way to actually get affordable housing. This is really changing your zoning ordinance. I mean, we discussed earlier what your high density is now is in maybe the 20-25 per acre. That's kind of, a basic threshold for medium high density for transit stops, transit opportunities, but there may be opportunities to look at higher density, specifically with regard to the I-25 Gateway District. Could there be mixed use opportunities, maybe going a little higher there than what would be tolerable in other parts of the community? So those are areas where you can start to reach economies of scale. But anytime you can lower the TDC, the total development cost for a developer, you can add a unit, you can add a portion of a unit, you can add a number of units depending on the scale of that particular project. But zoning can go a long way. It's also geographically defined, so it can at times help to alleviate some community concerns. Not always, certainly, but it does provide an opportunity, especially where you have some greenfield development opportunities. And then there's publicly owned land. You guys, the town does have some publicly owned land. You have some acres. That's a real asset to keep in your back pocket. Certainly, land can range from 25 to 50% of the cost of a unit, right? And so if you have the opportunity to sell or dispose of it at below market rates, or give it away, or partner with a private developer or a nonprofit developer, that's an opportunity to start to incentivize them and, as Charles alluded to, kind of get them get them through that final 15 yards into the goal, the end zone. It can be a little tough, right? Working with developers, there's certainly that partnership and financial challenges, but it is also an effective way to get affordable housing. And simply reducing land, that can come in the form of zoning as well, right? You allow more density, you've effectively reduced the land costs for housing. And I think this is our last slide. Again, you're doing some of this now with regard to acquisition and deed restriction. And I guess what I would say here is, as you think about different tools, whether it's down payment assistance, et cetera, you really do want to think, I think the mayor spoke to it earlier, actually, and that is, is this kind of permanently affordable or, temporarily affordable just for, the first person in, i.e. if you offered an affordable unit, you didn't deed restrict it, could they sell it within a couple of years at market rate? They certainly reap the benefits of that, the equity gains, but then it doesn't remain in the affordable pool. So generally recommended best practices would be that there are deed restrictions. There's an equity share gain, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6% equity share gain if it's a for sale unit, but protecting that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years ad infinitum if needed, right, is probably an effective methodology to assure that your housing that you put so much work and effort into does remain affordable down the line.
I ran across a foundation that does down payment assistance recently, and they provide a very large down payment assistance grant to home buyers. And the caveat to that is when you sell at market rent, should it appreciate, you have to split the gains with them, and that's how the foundation recaptures the funding. And so there are likely some creative ways that we can allow people to build wealth, to gain ownership, as a mechanism of a desired multiple sets of options with respect to creating affordability while also allowing people to participate in the wealth creation that is real estate.
Yeah, home equity is significant wealth creation. That's a good point. And those kind of equity sharing opportunities, you can be as creative as you want. If you had publicly owned land, it's not to say that you couldn't set up a CLT, a community land trust. You guys own the land and then simply long-term lease units on top of that land. That could be lease units, that could be mortgage units, but effectively you could give a 100-year lease for those units on that land. It's another way to allow for some equity gain, but preserve affordability long-term. And again, you have the opportunity to be as creative as you want. I think that's actually the last slide before we wrap up. I think we have some time for Q&A if you want. Just again, a final reminder, what comes next? We'll actually be in Erie on Thursday. We have a community open house at 4:30 at the library, where we'll have some boards set up, kind of explaining the project and some opportunities for community input at that time. So certainly you all are welcome to that. Did I get the time right on that, Ariel?
5 p.m. Sorry,
Oh,
we're going to be there at 4:30.
Okay. We're there
setting up 4:30.
Yeah. But yeah, certainly if you have friends and neighbors, certainly invite them out. We'd appreciate all of the input that we can get. And then again, we'll take that input, and over the course of the next couple of months, we'll be doing some of our analysis, and then we'll be back in front of you in November. So you guys have provided a significant amount of questions and feedback, so thanks for that. But really, we're wide open. Certainly, Jeff and Charles and I are available to discuss any items that you may have.
Trustee Bear?
Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak to if there are, or how, I guess, our affordable housing policy can help the town be more resilient when we have, booms and busts in the housing market or in the other economies. So if you could just talk about how affordable housing can help us ride those storms.
You're thinking of the resiliency in terms of housing product, is that correct?
Yeah, just, yeah, how it can help us, why it's important, I guess.
Well, certainly I'll let Jeff and Charles speak to this as well, but I think my first thought would be that having a diversity of housing product does allow you, when there is, say, a downturn, a slowdown in the economy, certainly people gravitate toward housing that's a little bit less expensive. Right now in your market, it's kind of all housing is at a certain level, single family detached units, it would all drop, say 15 or 20%, depending what the market does, right? It would kind of fluctuate the same. You would still have the same affordability issue at the end of the day. If you have different types of quads, triplexes, maybe cottage housing, maybe it's rental units, you have the opportunity to start to give people a bit of an option that is more financially attainable during those downturns. And so I think that different product does protect you in the downturns. And, even on the upturns, that's what we're facing right now, right? That different housing product protects those who can't quite reach the top, right? So diversity does offer you that protection. I don't know if Charles or Jeff have anything to add to that.
Yeah, when people talk about resiliency, there's lots of dimensions to that. And a couple of the ways that affordable housing contributes to it, people often will say, well, if you have people at a variety of income levels, able to work here, able to live here, if we get, like in Boulder, we got cut off in the floods, public safety people that don't live in Boulder couldn't get in. That's one dimension of it. What the facts are about what percent of people in affordable housing work in the community depends on the community and the labor market. So whether that would be a factor, I don't know. I tend to think of it more intergenerationally. The higher the housing costs, like we're seeing in Boulder and other places, the less ability you have to have multiple generations sequentially stay in the community. As my kids grow up here in Boulder, the probability of them being able to afford a place in Boulder is pretty low. They'll have to go live, make their lives somewhere else. And then if they do really well, they'll be able to come back. And so whether that kind of continuity of families is part of your conception of resilience, affordable housing can certainly contribute to that. So there's also, when you're looking at new production of housing, your housing stock's pretty new, so I don't know, and I don't know what, for example, your energy efficiency codes are and all of that, but as we move towards greater electrification, there's money in the affordable housing world to try and get ahead of that. So at some small level, new housing for that's affordable can potentially be more sustainable from an environmental perspective, if that's the dimension of resiliency you're thinking about. So there's a lot of dimensions and factors that can contribute to that resilience, depending on how you want to look at it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I'm looking at it from all angles, just how it benefits the whole community, and how we can, as we're developing this policy, that we are thinking about resiliency and how to really position ourselves to be able to benefit from that through this policy. Is an affordable housing policy nimble enough to adjust to a changing economic climate as we're making these choices now, and a year and 5 years and 10 years from now it looks different? Are we able to change the policy in order to meet those, like, quickly? I mean, how quickly can we do that?
Well, I would say the best way, unless you're very fast and nimble on your political decision-making, it's probably a better approach to take a set of tools that will work under different economic conditions. So inclusionary housing works great when you're producing a lot of housing in an up market price-wise, But we've all been through not too long ago housing markets that were pretty stagnant or not. And then in that case, if you're not building, you're not getting anything from that tool. But if prices are stagnant or even falling, that's a great time to try and acquire stuff if you have some capital available. Or perhaps it might be a good time if construction costs dip due to a recession to work with a partner who can produce on city-owned land a rental project with 100 units that would all be affordable, whether it's tax credits or through the housing authority. Whereas in a hotter market, they might not be able to do that because they're able to leverage your land to get going, and then they'll be able to compete better. So I think of it less as changing the policies over time as having a set of them that work over time. I mean, you've seen this in Longmont most clearly, where they had inclusionary housing and then they dropped it and then they got it back. But in the meantime, they lost quite a lot of ability to make progress because of the delay it takes to implement and get a program stood up. So we've seen that in other communities too. As you change the policies, it's very hard to get ahead of them. You're usually acting in oh, it's slowed down, it's not working anymore. That's a year or two into an economic cycle. And by the time you change the policy, the economic cycle is turned again. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. My last question, I think you've already answered, so I'll just stop there. Thank you so much.
We'll go to Trustee Harrison now.
All right, thank you. And thank you very much for the presentation and the wealth of knowledge that you provided. I'll piggyback onto what Trustee Bear says. I think from a resiliency standpoint is, I look back and what we learned from the 2008 housing crisis. There's obviously a variety of factors that added to that. We all know and have heard about them. But I think from a tangible perspective of a town like Erie that's growing, is to say, if we all of a sudden things did blow up and we had a recession that was pretty brutal, say starting next year or what have you, the concern is obviously people they'll lose their jobs, can't afford their homes, their mortgages, will sell the homes. People may not be able to afford to get into those homes. So you might have a certain amount of housing stock that's available on the resale value side of things. And then that also impacts your tax revenue for the very services that you're trying to be able to pay for and to do. And then you're going to have to start making tough decisions about what those priorities are, what's important. Obviously, the political side is the residents are going to get upset about decisions that are made. So I think what were the lessons learned of that kind of scenario that happened, I'm sure happened in that 2008 to 2009 timeframe, that can be applied now in terms of what we're trying to do that could kind of minimize that impact?
So I think it's a great question, and it ties to Trustee Bear's question on resilience. I think that what I might recommend is think of the question as resilience as having a relationship to how fiscally stable the municipal balance sheet is this year, 5 years from now, 25 years from now, 40 and 50 years from now. What kind of general fund balance do you anticipate having? To what extent do you have to titrate or ratchet up or down your mill rate in order to make sure that, you've got the revenue you need? And all of that effectively is going to tie back to how efficiently you use your land, and how diverse your stocks are. And so the greater the diversity of the stocks, both physical form and the way they're structured financially, right? So your portfolio, how diverse that portfolio is, and how intensively or efficiently you use every square foot of land, both of those are going to roll into long-term, the degree to which you're going to enjoy long-term fiscal stability at the municipal level or not. And so everything you can do to have mixed income development, a portfolio that is that is as diverse as you can possibly incentivize is a great down payment for long-term fiscal resiliency.
That makes perfect sense, and I agree with that. It's kind of like diversifying your portfolio and your stocks and bonds and everybody for those people who can afford to get those.
Right. So you're just
yeah.
going to be hating a 5% return year when everybody's got a 12% return year, but you'll be getting 5% when they're getting -10. And so
Exactly.
just, diversity is always going to be your friend in form, as long as you marry it to a high rate of return on, as you measure, the efficient use of your land.
Okay. And so that would tie into our zoning decisions, ordinances, everything else that we have to figure out in terms of those type of high level goals. So Malcolm, for that, that's probably something we would want to put from a strategic perspective. And then obviously how figure that out, and then how tactically we do that. And it gets to back to the point that was made earlier about tool set. And so my question to tool set is, kind of like a quiver of your arrows. You're taking one out for one specific kind of a scenario and one for another. But if it takes longer to get it out, my question is, from a process standpoint, Malcolm and others, and maybe Sarah, is there a way that we could possibly take a look at scenarios that have happened and have occurred, and we can game plan for that in terms of creating processes that will allow us to be able, so we see certain factors, certain things happening in the market, and we go, okay, there are warning signs, and okay, boom, here, okay, now we see it's very clear. We already have a process in place that we can pivot, like a sailboat. If anybody's sailed, you can tack from one place to tack from one side to the other when the wind changes, and you can do it quickly because you already have a process in place. It may, obviously government is not meant to be quick, but you can, I think that's also from a planning perspective of being able to, how do you see what's ahead of you, being able to tack at the right time to mitigate those risks. You're never going to be 100% successful, but you'll see if you can significantly mitigate that. That's, I think, from a process perspective, maybe we look at. And then thirdly, one other question is, and it hasn't been talked about, and maybe you all can help me from a demographic perspective, and that is, I know, at least I've read and know that, for instance, the amount of families and children being born in the United States has significantly dropped. And so you're seeing couples or maybe people not getting married at all. And so, and you might have, so there might be more not family homes that are being built in the future because of that population shift and that thinking. So I'm looking at, the whole aspect of the trend of tiny homes and all that sort of stuff, creating an environment or a neighborhood that is successful, that can handle that changing dynamic where people may not be getting as married. There's not as many families. You might have more, it looks different. It's more single people or maybe just couples, no kids. They don't need a 2,000 square foot or a 3,000 square foot home. They might try to be more resilient. So is there something in terms of data that's coming out that kind of shows that's a trend that's to pay attention to?
I would say you're right. I mean, I could certainly let Jeff speak to this. He's got a solid demographic understand, but I would say a couple of things. You're at about 3.04 persons per household. So you're higher than typically 2.21, 2.25 is a little bit more average nationally, right? That's pretty typical. I mean, so you're pretty typical of single family housing in a suburban environment, right? So you're already kind of directed toward a larger homeowner or a household, I should say, right? And so if you had the product, I suspect that you would get buyers and or tenants in that product. You just don't have it now, but you're right. There is a trend to smaller families, couples not having children, and also single people living alone, whether it's young people who are delaying marriage and or older people who have lost a spouse, right? You are seeing a trend toward that and a desire for kind of that autonomy, right? We have our own place, but yet we can enjoy the community that we're in. So yeah, I think you're definitely right. And you guys are, you know, you're about 3/4 of a person higher per household. So you're in a different, you guys have a, just by, again, your housing product, you have a different demographic makeup right now.
Just,
Right,
just
you attract what you build.
Yes.
just to confirm what you said that we're at 3.04 per household. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Mella, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we assumed 2.87. So that's even higher than I thought we were and the town thought they were. If we're at 3.04 per household instead of 2.87.
I'm sorry, my internet is not doing so well right now. So if you can't hear me, I apologize. The 2.87, that may be from our 2020 census. I don't know where the 3.04, Thomas and Charles, like, is that something that is on the ground, current data as of
It came
today?
current ACS data, the census data. And so you're probably hovering around 3, which is still higher than national average.
Yeah, we'll use Trustee Sawish when we do any projections when we get into our comp plan and any projections that we might do for affordable housing and population. We'll use the latest ACS data. So, which is apparently 3.04, higher than we all thought.
I think I'm right on that, but so it's right around 3, but yeah.
So I think, yeah, just to button it up, I think that obviously the type of homes that you build will attract certain people. I think that there's a growing, it goes up and down, but I think that the delay in families, for instance, having families is longer and longer and longer, based on because the cost of living is higher and higher and higher. And so I think that if you're able to focus on that, your density, or being able to plan for homes that cater to that element as one offering, could give you much more flexibility in terms of meeting that affordability perspective, because you're having smaller homes and more density, right? So
Absolutely.
Just along those
Maybe-
lines, I'll just add something that many communities that are looking at this are trying to anticipate. You were talking about strategic, Trustee Harrison. One of the things that many communities with a preponderance of single family homes struggle with is what happens as you age out of a single family home. Do you have to move out of your community to find to downsize? And I don't know your demographics well enough to know what your median age is, but I would suspect, given the price point and the housing type, you're looking at a lot of people in 15, 20 years might be leaving your community as they get older, because even though they don't want to. So that's another dimension of the housing stock that you want to create, and your resilience, as it were, as a community, based on who gets to live there. So
and to that point, my folks are 81 years old. They live in a rather large house. They want to downsize. But in the neighborhood they live in, those homes are still even smaller, are still really, really, really expensive. And so where would they go to? And
Trustee Harrison, I think there is a takeaway here, though, and that is, the more liquid that, housing is not a liquid commodity, by definition.
Right.
But the more diverse the overall portfolio is, right, and the more liquid it's going to be, and the less on the tail end of the curve that you are, right? So quickly moving the 5,000 square foot house and quickly moving the 500 square foot house is a pipe dream, right? So the more and the greater variety in the middle, right, keeps your stock at a high level of performance, capable of attracting and sustaining demand over a long period of time. And when you can sustain demand over a long period of time, your loan to value ratio is always going to be good. And when your loan to value ratio is always good, it means that capital markets will help you change the physical form as your family changes, right? And so, being as diverse as possible is a great way to immunize yourself against downturns.
Got it. That's a great takeaway. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Trustee Bell.
Thank you. Just one thing on that there about kind of aging community and having people move out. I think one factor in that is that, you know, typically in retirement, your two largest expenses are going to be taxes and health insurance. You're assumably, hopefully don't have a mortgage at that point in your career once you're retired. So I think because Erie, it tends to be on the higher side as far as property taxes. I think that might be another factor that could possibly drive people out.
I think that you're speaking of subdivisions that are in metro districts largely.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly adds to a factor in that, but yeah, I mean, just I think in general, if you look at neighbor, even areas that other areas that do have metro districts like Frederick, Firestone, Dacono, Erie's taxes tend to be a little bit higher.
That's interesting. So I guess as a part of the follow-up, as we wind this down to a close, I sent over a list of questions to our planning and housing department about learning more about what our neighboring communities are doing in terms of their inclusionary housing ordinances, some of the structure of the arrangements that they have around this. It would be good, to Trustee Bell's point, to have a comparison of our property taxes. If we are somehow much higher than others, maybe that's a lever that could be turned for some of these projects to make them more purposeful for creating such inventory.
Yes, we will add that. Those are great questions, and we're working on filling those out. One of the mayor's questions included just what are some of the other cities who are leading in inclusionary housing doing in terms of some of the specifics, and so I think that's going to be essential for us to be able to compare when we start to propose where we're coming in. And so thank you.
Yeah, this math problem, trying to solve affordable housing is or address it, it's more of a calculus problem than an algebra problem. There are many different ways that you can get to the same answer, and looking across the Front Range, just with municipalities I've talked to and some of the think tank sessions I've participated in, there are a million ways that people or communities serve to tackle this. So we definitely want to find a solution or a set of solutions that are appropriate for our community, because we're different than others. It's not an overused term. We actually are quite different. The research that you've provided in this is eye-opening in a sense that we're different in ways that even I didn't realize, and we have our work cut out for us. So I certainly appreciate the support and the knowledge that you've shared with us with regard to our options. We definitely look forward to learning more about what tools we might be able to bring forward to make progress towards our goal. And I'm also with Trustee Sawish and with finding more intermediate goals that are 5-pound targets as opposed to 40-pound weight loss targets. So it would make it a lot easier for us to digest what we're trying to accomplish. So thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, with that, the next item on the agenda is mobility and access for all ages and abilities, M4A or M quadruple A. Not sure if that's how you say it, or if you just say MA. This is item 22-373, and I don't have a presenter name on my agenda, so I'm not sure who is taking it. Is that Miss Edson? Welcome.
Mayor Brooks, Kemi, if I,
Oh, go
if I make an introduction, thank you so
Yes,
much.
please.
Well, good evening, everybody. Alberto de los Rios, Diversity and Inclusion Manager. I just wanted to take some time to introduce the Boulder County team on Mobility for All, presenting on the mobility and access for all ages and abilities. And I think that they say M4A, yeah, or MA. I don't think I've heard MA, but we can call it that. And joining us tonight, we have Miss Angel Bond. She's the Mobility for All coordinator. Then we also have Miss Cami Edson, the Youth Programs coordinator. And unfortunately, Dr. Jessica Villena Sanchez could not attend tonight. I also wanted to give you a heads up that Mr. Carlos Hernandez, our Senior Transportation Planner, may jump in with clarifications and comments as needed. And please allow for Ms. Bond to signal for questions or comments during the presentation to allow for a smooth transition. And without further ado, I want to welcome Angel and Kemi. Oh.
1 second before you get started. Mr. Hernandez is currently listed as an attendee. So while the presentation is going on, Ms. Ray, she done it. She read online, so he's promoted.
Thank you.
All right, off to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and appreciate your introduction, Alberto, and thank you all for giving us a little time tonight. We are your partners from Boulder County, myself and Angel. We work for the Transportation Planning Division in Boulder County, so we're over in community planning and permitting. So a lot of what you all were just talking about, we're thinking through the same things through the transportation and access and land use, combo lens. So I think this is nice to be here tonight. But specifically, Angel and I are going to review the Mobility and Access for All Ages plan that we have recently completed with partners throughout the county. It was a collaborative partnership, and so we're going to explain how the partnership went, what was the intent of the partnership, strategies and recommendations that sort of have come out of the plan, and how the town of Erie might be hopefully able to incorporate some of these recommendations and strategies that have come out of this collaborative plan. And we will definitely have time at the end for conversation and questions as well. I'm going to present about half of the slide deck, and then I will kick it over to my partner, Angel. And just to introduce myself a little bit, I am the Youth Transportation Program Coordinator for Boulder County. And so Angels and I choose programs work very parallel together, and we sort of see ourselves as the human-centered transportation planners for the county, not so much mode specific or route specific, but we interact with all of those peers who sort of take the lead on looking at transportation through those lenses. So we're really taking the human side of it. So next slide, Angel, please.
I just want to clarify that you're seeing the fully presented slide deck. Is that correct, Cam? Okay.
Oh,
Great.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, should say about the project, and I think it does. So the project focused on really looking at what do we need to do as partners all around Boulder County to really improve the mobility for seniors, people with disabilities, low-income individuals, and youth, sort of the kind of highest need groups when we come to accessing services. The organizations involved were really invited to essentially coordinate on developing this plan. This wasn't a plan meant for Boulder County alone, but really it's called a coordinated plan on purpose, and that we developed it together in partnership together. So not all of the strategies that we're going to view later are meant to necessarily be addressed by everyone, but that collaboratively we'd sort of figure out who would take the lead and really work on these in partnership. Developing this plan also sets Boulder County and its partners up to leverage some additional federal funding. It's called $5310, and it's really specific around how do we enhance mobility for individuals with disabilities. So because we have a coordinated plan, we are now eligible for that specific pot of funding. And part of that, one of the criteria was that you needed to have a locally developed coordinated plan. So about 18 months ago, we started this process, and the final plan has been written. I think we shared the website with you, but if not before, where you can find all of the documents that kind of led up to the plan, the final version. And right now, Angel and I are basically on the road show, taking it to all of our community all of our communities to make sure that those of you who aren't directly involved in the planning process are aware that this plan exists and how you might be able to use it in your additional planning processes, which it sounds like exactly what the presentation you were talking about before. Some of hopefully what we have to share with you tonight might be applicable. And it's the first plan for Boulder County of this kind. There hasn't been one like this before. So we're proud that we have this now, and as partners, we'll all be able to benefit from it. We have a short little I think it's slightly over 1 minute video that we'd like to share with you about the plan, and then we'll kind of dig into the details. So we'll let Angel start that for us.
Not everybody can just jump into a car and get where they need to go.
We'll big screen it and we'll turn the volume up just a second. There we go.
Not everybody can just jump into a car and get where they need to go. That is why Boulder County has developed the Mobility and Access for All Ages and Abilities Plan. This plan serves as a guide for all Boulder County multimodal transportation policy for improving transportation services for a wide range of people. Throughout the planning process, we heard from you and we developed strategies to address your unmet needs. We took your ideas, built on our past successes, and turned them into recommended actions for us to address in the future. Here are some of those suggestions.
It would be so important to have a reliable, safe option for our family.
I would like to see a little bit more paratransit.
I'd love to see a high-speed transit.
Nosotros creemos que el acceso al transporte es un derecho humano. La movilidad es un aspecto importante para todos, sin consideración de la edad, habilidad o ingreso.
I think of transportation a lot differently these days. Everything's logistical when you have a walker.
Without mobility, we really aren't anything, you know? We need to get to the doctor, we need to get to the store, we need to get to social services.
You want the elderly and disabled to get out and about, you know, have some kind of form of life decency common in life, but how can they if they can't afford to get around?
Sí, me gustaría que hubiera más cambio, más banquetas para andar en bicicleta, que se mejorara un poquito todo esto.
El Condado de Boulder, junto con socios comunitarios, ofrecemos programas que se enfocan en asegurar que los miembros de nuestras comunidades tengan acceso al transporte.
My experience when I was trying to help my boys navigate when they were going to and from Lafayette for school was I was having a hard time trying to figure out what time the bus was going to come, what time they were going to get picked up, what time they were going to get dropped off.
I really only got to and from places by car with my family, and I didn't really know about the other options that were available to me.
Throughout this process, community members and partners highlighted that we are moving in the right direction by expanding multimodal transportation programs and services. We'd like to build upon some of the progress that we've made.
Pues me gusta andar en bicicleta, caminar, conocer lugares. Casi la mayoría de veces siempre andamos paseando en bici.
You know, I think there's real progress being made in Boulder County with FlexRide being added on to RTD.
I don't think the city really realized how much fun they have given us by setting up that pathway under the road and then up to the lake.
Your ideas and thoughts were heard on the many current successes and remaining unmet needs. Now is the time for us to work together with community partners to coordinate funding streams, continue equitable investments in transportation, and promote community services and mobility options around Boulder County for all ages and abilities.
Great, thank you, Angel. So I think you'll see later, I think it was Trustee Harrison who brought up the demographics of the changing aging population, changing youth population, some of that stuff. We're definitely going to address some of those same topics later in the presentation. So like mentioned, this is really meant to be a new multimodal policy kind of plan or guide that hopefully our local partners could look at and review and see how could you incorporate some of the strategies recommended into your local planning efforts. But we have about 6 overarching goals and objectives when we started the plan development, and they were related to accessibility, equity, reliability. Those are the first 3. And really it was kind of how do we expand multimodal transportation options and get the information out about what is already available and what might be coming down in the pipeline as things are changing, as well as supporting those who might be switching from car ownership or reducing their cars or no longer have access to cars, how to make sure they still have mobility access and options. We really wanted to look at, oh, can you go back one, Angel, real quick? And also just from the equity and reliability space, just really really kind of determining where are those locations and places that really need to service special needs if they aren't already, or if they need improvements, where would those be? And really listening to those marginalized populations and responding to kind of what are their specific needs that haven't been met yet. And that we realize the reliability, especially we all are probably familiar with the challenges with the busing system right now with the lack of drivers and how that has been impacting routes that might have been either cut or temporarily serviced, or that the times aren't necessarily as reliable because drivers aren't able to, they're not showing up and, the buses is having to adjust for the day. So we know there's some reliability issues that might be out of all of our control. So what can we do to help support local families on top of supporting bus access? And then there are other 3 goals out of kind of our first 6 were efficiency, sustainability, and safety. I think safety is something that everyone prioritizes. We've heard that from all of our partners. So there's definitely safety recommendations and elements within the plan. Obviously, how do these recommendations not only overlap with land use policies, but also with air quality or other sustainability or environmental policies that you all might have? And then really looking at what are the strains on the existing resources and how can we effectively change current services to really help meet those needs, whether it was through the pandemic or whether it was through sort of the the mass retirement that's going on, just the changing in the nature of the workforce that is happening. So next slide, please. So who was involved? Like we said, Angel and I sort of facilitated this process getting done, but we worked with probably 40 to 50 different local partners to complete this plan. We really mean it when we say it's a coordinated plan. We had a technical advisory committee of which there were 25 different partner agency representatives who really kind of acted and took kind of a deeper dive into the plan as we were developing it through all of its different drafts. We also worked with a number of community partners who may have just reviewed or given advice on specific pieces of the plan, not necessarily overall. And then we also held a number of different affinity groups or focus groups, which really had more of that perspective on those groups with special needs. So youth serving programs, programs with disabilities or families or those experiencing disabilities, those who are sort of experts, whether it's lived or professional around racial, ethnic, and income equity, healthcare. A lot of municipal planners were involved, the school districts were involved. So we really tried to make sure that we heard from not only community members themselves, but from those professionals who are serving our most vulnerable populations from all the different kind of avenues that come as. So next slide, please. The process we took was earlier in the year or earlier before the plan was finalized, after we had all of those affinity meetings and sort of focus groups, we had an existing conditions report created, which is available on our website if you are curious about that. And then when the final plan was drafted, we had a comment period open for about a month and a half. We presented to a number of different existing community groups out there. We shared the plan and through newsletters, social media, obviously asked for partner shares, and we really put it out there for public comment. We received over 110 comments, which were then integrated into the final plan. And And then we went to the Boulder County Commissioners, let's see, probably about a month and a half ago at this point, presented it to them for plan adoption to become the new multimodal policy plan for the county. And they adopted it that day. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the existing condition report really highlighted some of what we already knew, but was really that transportation is a critical issue, which intersects with a number of different issues such as climate policy, equity, affordability, public health. We know that the travel needs for those residents and those who are working in Boulder County go beyond our borders. These invisible lines, people are living and working and playing and recreating or seeking family or services beyond our invisible boundary lines. So coordination, transportation is needed there. And that there's not enough supply to meet the demand. There aren't enough buses, there aren't enough drivers, there's not enough volunteers, whatever it might be. We know there's a lot more demand, just what you all were talking about before with both housing and transportation services. This may be of direct interest to what we were talking about demographically for some of you. And it sounded like, I think it was Sarah who said, you obviously are looking at your own data specific to Erie and the Boulder County side and the Weld County side. But for Boulder County, the orange bar here highlights where we are compared to the state, which is the blue line right above, the blue row. And then all of the neighboring counties are listed below. And a couple of things that we wanted to point out is that in Boulder County, our aging population is growing faster than any other. They're not necessarily the largest group at the moment, but they are growing faster than any other group listed here. Let's see, another thing worth pointing out is that we do have a high percentage of population of youth in Boulder County, and Hispanic youth in Boulder County represent almost a quarter of the youth in Boulder County. And so when you think if we have a high number of youth, they have their adult and or caregivers. Those caregivers are most likely the working population. So when we're looking at transportation planning and housing planning, where do people need to go? I think looking at households or family households is really important, is that youth is a pretty big group out of the vulnerable populations, or kind of those with special needs, still here in Boulder County. Even though you brought up the trends are changing, we still have a high population of families with households with youth. So something to keep in mind. And all of this data, just so you came from the ACS or sort of census data. We didn't have 2020 data available to us when we did the planning process. So, but 2020 data is available now, which I'm sure you were aware of when you were talking earlier. So you could look at some of these same demographics specific to Erie as you're interested. It is available. This is just some more demographic data, which it sounds like you might be familiar with and have your sources around, some of the demographic information. Let's see, next slide, please. What we did create in the plan was Boulder County, like a transit propensity map. So we looked at all of sort of our special needs populations and plotted out where are they located. And you said the darkest blue is really where the highest density is around and where the need for transit needs to be. And then the lighter areas sort of less need when it comes to the makeup of services available and population. Unfortunately, it didn't go past the Boulder County line, so we don't have all of Erie represented on this map. But that data is available for you. We can talk about how we created this if this would be of interest to you to sort of complete an Erie map at some point. Next slide, please. We also looked at a job house balance map. These are all available in the final plan. Next slide. So we'll just kind of run through, in interest of time, some of the maps. But basically, what some of the things that came out as really clear needs is that additional data is needed, and sort of more consistent data among partners would be helpful. That we're all looking at it at the same way, so we can kind of do better comparison of apples to apples across communities in Boulder County. And that our current regional land use and urban design policies and are not necessarily conducive to transit, to support transit. And that the cost of transportation is a burden for residents and our, our population on top of the rising housing costs. And that community groups, nonprofits, and governments are not necessarily, we don't have enough resources combined. So again, the whole idea is we know we're going to be stronger if we work together to meet these needs instead of everyone tackling them individually. Service gaps are another need. Awareness of the transportation options is another need amongst the general public. And some of the more longer term challenges that arose were really around climate change, systemic discrimination, the aging infrastructure and population, which I mentioned earlier, that's the fastest growing group in the county. And then how the role of technology impacts sort of all of the above here. So what we did in the plan is that we organized all of the strategies after all the discussions and themes that emerged through this process with partners. We really organized what we heard by need. And so in the plan, and I think it's really right after the executive summary in the plan, we'll show you an image here, but there is a nice chart that really organizes the strategies we have into what's already in progress. A tier 1 priority is something that might be addressed more in the near term or in the next 2 years, or something that might be take a little bit longer to address, something in the next 3 to 5 years. And then there's some of those more longer term recommendations as well. But we really want to reiterate that this plan was meant to be shared among all of our local partners, since we can't address them alone. Boulder County can't tackle all of these alone. And so we hope you really take the time to look at the strategies after the presentation, if you haven't already, to see how Erie, town of Erie, might be able to incorporate some of these recommendations into the planning work you're already doing. Let's see. In the plan, this is the chart I was mentioning. There's a colorful chart right after the executive summary that kind of looks like this, all of these, the colorful 6 images here. There were 25 total strategies that came out in this plan. They were organized into 7 different areas, which you see listed here: data, access, cost, resource, service gaps, awareness, and ongoing policies. We're going to review some of the key findings and the ones that might be most relevant to you all here in just a second. But you can see there's a number of different strategies per category. And so we think that town of Erie is going to find their way into a number of these and realize that you're also working on the same issue. So how could we collectively work together to help kind of meet the region's needs? Next slide, please. I'm going to actually kick it over to Angel now, sorry. And she's going to kind of walk us through the data strategies, and then we'll wrap it up and kind of open it up for questions.
Great, thank you, Cami. So as Cami mentioned, the tier 1 and the tier 2 really are broken out in the first, tier 1 being the first 2 years, and tier 2 being 3 to 5 years. This is a short-term transportation plan, so a lot of times we're focusing on that longer-term strategy through our transportation master plan, which is our base document that we're working from. But really, these goals were intended to be implementable within the next 5 years. So I'm going to go ahead and just highlight a couple of each of the strategies, some of the shorter term and some of the like midterm strategies. So as Cami mentioned, the data strategy, we talked about having a Boulder County specific transit plan. So we acknowledge that we're growing and that our region is changing. So we're seeing a lot of travel like to and from Weld and Larimer counties, where our current situation is set up for DRCOG kind of to be that center point. And we're seeing just as much influx of traffic from Larimer and Weld counties. So we really do need to understand what is a transit plan that would work for the travel patterns for Boulder County. So that's a tier 1 strategy. The commissioners have allocated $100,000 to kind of get that started. And we're going to be applying for a TIP grant, so a Transportation Improvement Project grant from DRCOG, to see if we can really hone in on what are our needs as a county. Also, Cami will be applying for a Vision Zero Safe Routes to School Action Plan. So that would really be a plan that would lay out how to prioritize the Safe Routes projects and how to coordinate as a whole region when we're pursuing those safety and Vision Zero goals as they pertain to youth and schools. And the tier 2 is really more about formalizing our data collection. We realized that all of our transportation providers collect data in different ways. All of our schools and all of our programs collect data in different ways. So it prohibits us from getting a full picture of like what's really happening with our transportation needs. The access strategy is something that Boulder County specifically won't have a whole lot of control over because we don't really have a lot of unincorporated Boulder County bus stops. But this is really a priority for the municipalities and for the nonprofits that are like central for people who are vulnerable. So we want to make sure that those routes to those essential services are paved and accessible. And we want to make sure that there's year-round maintenance. What we've heard from people with mobility devices is when it snows, it's really hard on people who can't shovel their sidewalk. And they're pretty much stuck in their house if they have limited mobility. So we want to raise that awareness with the municipalities and try to address that through nonprofits or just in general, like just raise awareness to shovel your partner's sidewalk. The next strategy is really those cost strategies. So what we heard time and time again from our partners and from our focus groups is that it's an expensive area to live in, right? I mean, you all were just talking about affordable housing. We've been able to expand programs like Ride Free Lafayette, which is an on-demand service in Lafayette, Ride Free Longmont, which is all the local buses in Longmont. The city of Longmont like buys down the fares so that they're free for anybody. Netherland and Lions both have EcoPass programs. So we really want to continue that to where there's like zero barriers or low barriers to accessing transit from a cost perspective. And also focusing on reimbursing or covering costs for nonprofits and community liaisons at the schools to purchase bus passes for folks in need. There's some resource strategies. The big elephant in the room here is the support of driver training and retention. So we know that with the driver shortage, this could be a huge obstacle for our partners and for us to be able to implement some of these visions that we see. So really trying to raise awareness of how important drivers are and how we can't have people living in the community and accessing all their services without a driver corps, without all of, and this is impacting school bus drivers, volunteer drivers, RTD, it's everybody. It's not just RTD, you're not just the school districts. So we're seeing shortages all up and down the board. Also, we would like to expand the pot of competitive funding for grants. We know that there's a lot of federal grants coming out with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And really, how do we identify those funding sources locally so that we can really take advantage of those? Some of the other service gaps are basically the RTD Access Rights Certification Center. This is a project that the Mobility and Access Coalition has identified. People who have disabilities who want to qualify for Access Ride have to go to Denver to do so. And that's a barrier for families, especially families that have youth with disabilities who can't necessarily take off half a day of work to go down to Denver to help get their kid access to transportation or adult child with a disability access to transportation. So we would like to bring those certification services closer to Boulder County. There's also volunteer driver programs. We know that those are a little bit more flexible for areas like the mountains. So really supporting volunteer driving. And there's also, it also could be a useful tool for Erie and other cross, because I know you all are in Weld and Bold. So sometimes those volunteer driver programs can be a little bit more flexible for people who have special needs transportation. We've also talked about in the next 5 years or so to expand hybrid connector services in areas underserved by fixed route transit. So you'll see this one coming back to you probably with the TIP allocation or the TIP applications. We would like to do a Southeast Boulder County on-demand service that we could coordinate with the Weld County side. This might be a discussion that we can have in the question and answer period, but we acknowledge that people want to cross the boundary between Boulder and Weld County, and also people want to cross the boundaries between Louisville and Lafayette, right? So those artificial boundaries don't really reflect how people travel. So how can we have more flexible on-demand services that can cross those boundaries? The awareness strategy, this one really is, there are a lot of services out there that people just don't know of, or they're not, they don't really think of them as an option for them. So a lot of times people, as they age, maybe they don't want to use VIA because they equate that to like the senior bus, right? So how do we get people to understand that Via Mobility Services is an option for a lot of people and that they have volunteer driver programs? So really expanding awareness of how to use the options that are out there and then what is out there. And additionally, can we promote vocational training for CDLs to increase the number of drivers? Can we help train high schoolers how to maintain bikes so that they have that vocational training? And that's also included in this plan. And these ongoing policies, these ones are the persistent ones that are just going to be really hard. We're not going to be able to accomplish these in the next 5 years. But that thoughtful land use that coordinates, that allows for coordinated transportation. It's pretty fitting that we're here on the same day as affordable housing, because we like to talk about affordable living, which is your housing plus your transportation shouldn't equal more than 45% of your income, which is super hard to do in our area. And what we see is that people really drive until they qualify for housing, but they don't necessarily realize how much owning a car costs them. So we'd really like to raise thoughtful land use planning so that we can have transportation and people won't have to have a personal automobile. Also talking about universal design so that accessibility is not an afterthought. We don't just put a ramp on the back or the side of a building to the transit station, but we really incorporate it into the design so that accessibility and dual languages, other languages are not an afterthought. They're really incorporated into how we market and how we have wayfinding. And there's also continuing equitable investment in communities, right? This has been something that Boulder County has done a lot of with our fare-free pilots that we've done, and just really continuing that investment and understanding that transportation is a key to equity for families, people of all ages and abilities. So as Cami mentioned, we have a lot of priorities in progress. So if they were low-hanging fruit items, if they were low-hanging fruit items throughout the planning process, we began incorporating them into our budget cycle because it was an 18-month period. So Cami's been doing with a PhD researcher a school travel study, and they did a place-it exercise to really kind of understand the travel needs of households with young children that go to school. We've incorporated equitable outreach strategies, bilingual strategies. We've expanded our bilingual capacity, and unfortunately, Dr. Jessica Viana Sanchez wasn't able to attend here, but she's our newest bilingual mobility planner. We've also expanded Earn a Bike workshops at housing authority sites and really expanding eco-passes at housing authority sites as well. And the Ride Free Lafayette service is something that we've been continuing to support since 2020. We're seeking funding for that Vision Zero action plan that I mentioned earlier, the volunteer driver program in the mountains, transit study, and then also that youth safety piece around bicycle education, biking and walking. And here's a summary of our strategies. I'll go ahead and leave it on here. I do have a couple of questions on the next slide, but it's good to kind of see all of these strategies. So we're going to turn it back to you. I know we've been talking at you for quite a while. What strategies really stand out to you and from the town of Erie's perspective as being important for you to incorporate in your comp plan and your TMP?
We'll take it first to Trustee Harrison.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Yeah, and like I did in the previous presentation, I'll just try to put it into tangible sort of world. And so for in all transparency, my uncle is 76 years old. He's mentally handicapped. He has cerebral palsy. He's in a wheelchair. He has Alzheimer's, and he also has epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a triple thing going on. But just to give you an idea, that is a picture of him, so everybody can actually put a face to a name. And that's him over at my house a couple weeks ago with our little puppy. His name is Lawrence, and so he's my father's brother. So he lives in and has lived in a group home in Denver for a very long time. When COVID, right before COVID hit, they lost all their funding from the Jewish Family Services.
Wow.
So this particular, he has no job. He can't make money. He needs a bed. He needs all those stuff. In a matter of 2 weeks, all of a sudden COVID hit. and we were scrambling to find a place for him because he couldn't stay with us because of COVID and the fact that he was of his health stature would not be a good match to be with us because we were concerned of getting him infected. And so we had to find emergency housing for him all the way down in Parker. And so took him out of his home that he had been in for 38 years. And so we went through, he had a lot of health troubles. Luckily, COVID was chasing him. He missed it by a week and survived, found an emergency home. And then I was trying to get him up here to Boulder, thankfully through a community or a organization called Imagine, which Angel, you might, and Cami might be aware of. It's in Lafayette. It's a rather large organization. I tried to get him into a group home up here. He was one in Boulder for a little while. Thankfully, we brought him up. And now he's in one in Broomfield, just near where all the Amazon warehouses are. And so for him, mobility is important. And so he goes to Imagine's offices for day programs. So he takes RTD and he takes an Accessoride. I think he comes and picks him up, takes him down there. So I think from that standpoint, my question is, those community sort of programs or with Imagine and groups and communities like that, have you been able to work with Imagine or others like them to be able to ask for their needs and what their concerns are? Because group homes are not ubiquitous. It's only up to somebody who's willing to open up their home to take in handicapped individuals. And God bless them for being able to do that. The amount of work that I see going on and the volunteer work and for those who do get paid, they're all in wheelchairs. A lot of them are unable to walk and they're not as high functioning. So we have to think about those communities and what we can do, and especially in Erie, there wasn't any group homes that I could be close by. Luckily, we found this one that was within 10 minutes. So can you speak to that a little in terms of that aspect of it from those disadvantaged communities, what we could do to help out with that?
Yeah. First, I just want to say I'm sorry that you had to go through all that, because that is a whole chore, because a lot of times there are federal barriers, federal programming barriers that really limit what people can do and really limit what options they can take advantage of. Actually, Medicaid funds quite a bit of transportation.
It does.
They are notoriously really hard to coordinate with. As Cami mentioned, the name of this is a coordinated plan. The federal government requires these coordinated plans because they fund 136 different programs for transportation, from Older American Act to Medicaid to Veterans Services to Safe Routes to School to FTA. And really, we're trying to get everybody who receives all of those little pots of funding to coordinate our services so we can reduce the amount of pushing people here and there so that they have to go everywhere to find answers. Group home access is really in shortage in Boulder County, not just in Erie and Weld County. I know that we addressed that in our comprehensive plan update that we did to housing with community planning and permitting. There's some regulations, I don't understand it fully, but Medicaid, we do coordinate with Imagine on getting information out. We have not coordinated with them on the next level, like coordinating fleets, right? So ideally, we would be able to have like the VIA mobility services who receive a lot of those different funds, coordinate fleets with Imagine to expand the amount of access. Usually, the reason why I think I mentioned this earlier was Medicaid is pretty isolated because they just have so many caveats and so many rules and restrictions. So I'd love to coordinate a little bit more closely with Imagine. They do get information out for us, but they don't communicate back their needs because they're communicating with HCPF. The biggest issue that I've seen with Medicaid is medical transportation. They have to go through IntelliRide, which is a brokerage service. And I recently got on the community advisory board for IntelliRide, which is great, but they have huge issues with missed trips, like not really helping people navigate signing up. So I will definitely reach out to you with some information on IntelliRide. Yeah, and I hope that there can be some more group homes closer to where you're at, but 10 minutes is a great distance.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
we're lucky in regard to that, imagine. And I think that's the thing when it comes to Via Ride and others that are Boulder specific, to your point earlier, crossing lines. This is a very good example. They're in Broomfield County. And so RTD, I think, is the only way that he can go, and that's probably because of Medicaid. But for people to understand who are not in the situation that I'm in, if it was not for Medicare and Medicaid, my uncle and whatever it would be incumbent upon me and me alone to support him.
Yeah.
There is no other funding for people like this. And there are a lot more people like this in your community than you realize. And so again, when it comes to a budget, show me your budget, I'll show you your values. And I think that's something that we have to always consider and keep in mind when it comes to things like this. And so I appreciate the work you do here, whatever work that can be here. I know Carlos, we talked briefly about transit oriented stuff. I think this is an area of community that helps folks like them and others would be something to definitely take a look at. So I appreciate all the work.
There is one thing that came up when you were responding, is that housing transportation connection. What I have dealt with sometimes is people aren't thinking of the transportation when they move, right? Because they have to move to a more affordable place. And all of a sudden they're in a situation, especially if they have a disability, where Access-a-Ride doesn't go there, right? Because Access-a-Ride only travels 3/4 of a mile from the fixed route bus. And that's just heartbreaking, because RTD is not going to change their service area for one person. So just if we can reiterate that housing transportation dynamic over and over and over again, that would be great.
Yeah, and exploring the Lafayette Free Ride, from what I understand, has been very successful. There's a possibility that we may want to see what that's like and help in that regard. And I think taking a look at all other options out there to help those would be wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you. I see Trustee Bear, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I had a couple of questions. So this is the Boulder County plan. Would this plan extend to all of Erie?
So this is a plan that leverages partnerships. So we have what's called a Mobility and Access Coalition, which is an organization called a Local Coordinating Council that really was instrumental in developing this. If Erie decided to adopt these strategies in their policies, of course it would apply. I would say that Boulder County is here as a partner to help you implement or help implement these strategies in all of Weld County. I don't think that we're so focused. We're focused on the humans, as Cami had said. So there are obvious funding challenges, right? So we wouldn't be able to fund a new service in Weld County, but if it's information and referral services and raising awareness, we're not going to turn anybody away. We get calls sometimes from Colorado Springs, and we provide them with the mobility manager down there. So we'll always provide information and the strategies and assistance to Erie, but the funding bit is where we get a little bit more complicated.
Okay. So then as far as priorities for Erie, I do hear from residents that transportation is such an important and sort of missing service in Erie. And one thing is those invisible lines. They need access to be able to get to medical care, healthcare, that is in Longmont or Boulder, or and a lot of them need help, getting their spouse or a family member that they care for to those locations. So that's definitely a need. But as far as priorities, funding is key, as Town Administrator Fleming said in a Northern Area Transit Alliance meeting we were in, that plans are great, but without funding, they're daydreams. So, and as Trustee Harrison said, show me your budget, I'll show your priorities. So I'm glad to hear that Boulder County Commissioners have already began to fund, and you're looking at ways to bring more funding. I think that's so important. And then the focus on youth and seniors and accessibility. I feel like they have a lot of overlapping needs that could be beneficial should we address, you know, youth transit needs, like accessibility, affordability, ease of use, on-demand rides. Those things can certainly support our so many different groups. So the transit access improvements will be important, I think, for our community. And then I was going to ask about language access, but I can tell that that is absolutely built into this. It's the design and the consideration, and I really appreciate that. I would love to learn more about it, but I appreciate that that's really been thought through and clear that that's the consideration. Yeah.
So I do want to address, we have a sales tax extension on the ballot this fall. And right now, since it's on the ballot, like county staff can't necessarily we can just provide the facts about it, but we are proposing that 5% of that sales tax extension go to implement mobility programs. So primarily implementing this mobility and access for all ages and abilities plan. That was not the case with the current sales tax. So that is a change of priorities. So we had 60% going to roads and resiliency, and then now that's going down to 55 if it gets extended, and then 5%, that 5% that we save is going to be going to these special needs populations. So we'll wait to see what happens with the fall election. But so there could potentially be some funding. And then just in general, like I know if Cami, I don't know if you want to speak to the building for youth and older adults.
Well, I was going to say, you spoke, Trustee Barrick, to exactly, I think we say a lot, right? If we build a system that works for youth, those who are experiencing disability, and the elderly, then we've built a system that works for everyone, right? So I think that's where Angel and I's programs, right? We might have a little bit of different focus on population, but there's even so much overlap amongst ours when we're talking about language access issues or affordability issues. I mean, they address everybody. So, and another way that we're trying to, bring in some money is through this Vision Zero Safe Routes Action Plan to really take that work and turn it into a more proactive approach by identifying where should we prioritize and then go doing the site-based work. So then in partnership between the counties and the local communities and whoever we can get it onto our plans in advance, so we know who needs to be who's matched, instead of always being in a situation where we're being reactionary and then no one is necessarily ready to fund those projects when they're identified. So that's where through this plan, that's one of the things we're trying to do, is really emphasize the safety and go be more proactive with project planning and funding instead of being so reactionary like some of this work has been historically done.
Yeah, that's really great. I love to hear that. Well, thank you so much for this presentation. I think that's all I had right this minute.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Trustee Hoback now.
Thank you. Just a real quick comment. It's hard. You saw the affordability housing, or you saw this. I think you saw at least part of the presentation, so you know what kind of community we have. It's so terribly hard to prioritize these things because when it comes to this, we have virtually nothing. And thank you to Trustee Harrison for putting a face to the issues. One of the faces I look back on was when Mayor Brooks and I were knocking on doors last winter. And in addition to being concerned about letting the heat out of her residence, a young lady was concerned about getting to work. We don't have any public transportation. So whatever that can be done, whatever we can do to help, I'm happy to take part. Thank you.
Thank you. We have heard an increased report of people choosing between fueling their vehicle and food, especially during COVID, and then also with the high gas prices this last summer. So your rent is pretty fixed, right? So those, when you're living on a budget, like food and fuel are what you can kind of compromise on. That's not what we want to see people, the situation we want to see people in. But not having backup options really makes people dependent on the personal auto. And we've seen so many families who go into crisis mode because their car breaks down and they have to choose between fixing their car or paying their rent. If they fix their car, they can get to work, but then they can't necessarily pay their rent. So how do we like get ahead of that to like teach people beforehand what options there are and provide backup options so that people can have choices?
I'll just put in a plug for two of the programs that Angel mentioned earlier. Is the ideas to consider is around those volunteer driver programs that can cross those invisible lines, and really looking at that Southeast collaboration with possibly a fare free system similar to, you know, Ride Free Lafayette that is already in discussion with some of the communities, and Erie has definitely been thought of as could they potentially be a part of that collaborative effort as well, and does that make sense? So I think there's some good works and planning and discussions already in, you know, in play around some of these potential solutions that aren't, we have to, you know, since we don't have our own service available that we can manage, you know, what else is in play.
Thank you. And we'll go to Trustee Sawish now.
So I think we asked this question to every single individual that we talk to that comes before us about transportation needs. We are the least serviced RTD district area in the RTD system itself. What ways are there that maybe we haven't thought of that we can put pressure on RTD to provide service? Because many of the items that we're discussing as what is the next level, we don't even have a base level of service that is provided to us. So if we do want service, we do have to think about those outside the box ways of providing service to our residents. I'd say 80 to 90% of residents within our town, they pay RTD district taxes, yet they don't receive the benefits of what is available through there. Even, you know, say the city of Lafayette, they had some of their services cut, and that was a way for us to get access to those. So just, you know, any commentary, any feedback? I know we do have our transportation manager here, so, you know, just maybe he can chime in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Carlos, I don't know if you want to tackle that request. I think that two of the big projects are probably bus rapid transit on State Highway 7 and then the Southeast Boulder County Flex Express, but I'll let Carlos take it because he's more familiar.
Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, probably worth just thanking Angel and Cammie. This is incredible work. And they just really, the dedication and the passion you have for that and the perseverance really is amazing. So thanks for doing this tonight. I've taken a lot of notes and I have a couple of action items out of this. Directly to the question, we're on it. We started this week with the Federal Transit Administration. Angel and I were both on the call, and we were beginning to advocate for restoration of services in Erie through the ARPA money, the recovery money that's coming through to Boulder County to help recover services in our area. I wish it was more, but it is something to start. I think Mayor Brooks said it well in the beginning that we're going to lose 5 pounds before we lose 20. So this is our 5-pound goal. So that money will be coming, and we're going to try to restore jump service. And then when the drivers are ready, we're going to be repositioning a route that will connect us to Lafayette, that will get service to Denver. So those are in the works, and we're advocating almost every other day with RTD, my group is, on making those changes happen. And the good news is they're in the service plan adjustment for the upcoming rounds. There's just this driver shortage issue we keep talking about. So once that sorts out, the money's in place, the directions in place with RTD, and we're going to get restoration. That's clearly not enough. So tomorrow night at our joint meeting, which I know you'll all be at, and it'll probably be about this time, 24 hours from now, we've been coordinating with Lafayette staff and the strategies we have for the extension. I think Angel brought this up, the extension of Lafayette Flex Ride into our area. And that's a really exciting opportunity. We are going to, in our next round of funding for Dr. Cog, request the funding for that so that we get the money set so that when the drivers are back, we can pull that off. And then the third piece that I don't think was mentioned, but is so critical right now. Boulder County is going to become essentially a recipient. They can receive money from the Federal Transit Administration. And that is going to solve, I think, a lot of the challenges Erie had with all these boundaries of where RTD can operate and can't, or what's Weld County and Boulder County. Boulder County as a transit operator will help us transverse these boundaries. And that's really key. If you think about Boulder getting flex service to Larimer County over county lines out of RTD and ending in Larimer County up in Fort Collins, that's the model we need. And because Boulder County staff are working so hard to do this, they're actually going to be able to tap into FTA funds that don't just go into the RTD slush fund anymore. And it's a real, and honestly, it's like really revolutionary, groundbreaking work in Colorado that's being done. And we're on the table helping pull those knobs as we go. So you all Malcolm made an amazing decision to help bring our team on board to do this. And I would say weekly, we are in front of RTD trying to bring these services back.
Great. I would also add to that, not that I can like match that, but there's also more personalized services like volunteer driver programs. And then also we actually have an ambassador mobility for all those education and training programs. We have one ambassador who's in Erie, but we teach people how to use Uber and Lyft and RTD mobile ticketing to kind of really get those personalized services and overcome the barriers that older adults and people with disabilities have. So through a combination like of more flexible individualized services and then advocating for transit, I think that you all are in a good position.
I'll finally add that Miguel will start next week and we're making a list of him, but at the top of his list is on our website to get these services available for residents. I've already received emails from residents, some who are visually impaired, some who have lost the ability to drive through what happened as a result of COVID, and they want these services. So we have already created links and we're going to work with Boulder County on a clearinghouse information on our website so that you as trustees as well, when you get those questions, at least we're starting to connect the resources on our website to what's available. So that's an immediate action item that will happen in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much for this presentation. I was going to bring up what Carlos did with regard to our joint meeting tomorrow with Lafayette. So
great.
Excellent. Looking forward to that conversation and looking forward to having more of these strategies deployed in our community. So it's definitely well beyond needed.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time tonight. I know that even if we don't have the funding to kind of follow this, we're always a resource. So Cammie's an expert in all things school and youth transportation related. And I really focus on older adults, people with disabilities, low-income households, and BIPOC folks. So please reach out. We have some staff, and especially if it's marketing and outreach, like we can definitely be great partners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda, we have a discussion of contracted versus in-house legal counsel services, cost comparison, pros and cons. And I believe I'm going to hand that over to Malcolm to present.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll kick it off, and Alicia is here also. She did most of the hard work, all of the hard work in gathering data and collecting other information. Trustee Sawish originally asked us to research this issue, and then a majority of the board asked for it. And we did a little more detailed research to compare what several other jurisdictions have done in terms of in-house versus contracted legal services. And Alicia contacted Brighton, Commerce City, Steamboat Springs, and Windsor. Those were the closest, or the jurisdictions that are closest in size to Erie and have in-house contracted legal, in-house legal services where they have actually a town attorney, a deputy attorney in some cases, and legal assistant working with them. That seems to be the typical model for jurisdictions that are roughly our size. Alicia also tracked down a study done by the city of Fort Collins on larger jurisdictions and how they staff their legal departments when they have in-house services. And just looking at that information, which is in your packet, it looks like there's typically around one legal position per 10,000 in population, just very roughly. So using that information, we compiled what would be the costs associated with staffing a legal department of that size, 3 people. It would be roughly around $550,000. That compares to the contracted services that we currently have through the Kendra Carberry's firm, Hoffman. Now I can't remember, I've got it somewhere in my notes, but Kendra's firm that typically runs, or over the past 3 years has ranged from about $350,000 to about $415,000. 418,000 in 2019, then dropping down to about 350,000 last year. We do contract out for many other legal services besides those general legal services, including oil and gas, water rights, litigation, personnel matters. Kendra's firm is not the only entity that we're contracting with because the town has varied legal needs. So with that, in your packet, we also summarized pros and cons, both from the town attorney and from the other jurisdictions that have those in-house services. I guess I would summarize that information as saying in-house services has the advantage of being able to get easy access to those attorneys. They're down the hall or easy to access. When I worked in Bellingham, Washington, we had in-house legal services, and I certainly appreciated being able to walk down the hall and talk with the attorneys and have easy access to them. On the other hand, legal in-house services wouldn't eliminate the need to continue contracting for specialized legal services. And I think Kendra pointed out a potential con of in-house is maybe not getting that blunt advice that will help you make sure you really have considered the risks associated with an issue. I would hope that you'd still get that blunt advice from an in-house attorney, but that may or may not be the case depending on the individual. So with that very high level summary, I'd be, unless Alicia has any additional information that I missed, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I think you about covered it.
Go ahead, Trustee Sausch.
Okay, so when we had originally received the first and second round of information from the town administrator, the cost was about $352,000 or something like that. We're now saying that the cost would be $200,000 more than was originally noted. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's roughly correct. Originally, we thought we could do it with 2 positions. That was based on some analysis that our compensation consultant did, the Graves firm. And that was a very quick study. And then when the entire board asked to look at this, or the majority of the board, Alicia did some additional research and compared solicited information from the cities and towns I mentioned. And based on that, it looks like a model for an organization with our complexity would require 3 positions rather than just 2. Although I would say Windsor, I think, is a jurisdiction roughly our size, maybe even a little bit bigger, slightly bigger, and they currently only have 2 attorneys in their in-house legal department.
That's correct. And the initial model that we sent over only included 1 attorney and 1 legal assistant. And after speaking with the other jurisdictions, the thought was you need at least 2 attorneys in order to cover things like Board of Trustee meetings in case your primary attorney wanted to take vacation, let's say.
Okay, and if I see, based on the information that was sent over, so we've been talking about largely just one position in this conversation, which was the town attorney position. But if I understand correctly, say the town of Windsor, the assistant town attorney is also the town prosecutor, is that correct?
I think in Windsor, that's the case, yes.
So the town prosecutor is another one of those positions that fall under us, which I believe we currently contract out. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're currently contracting, it's a different firm, but that expense is included in Kendra's firm's invoices. They contract with that other firm to provide those prosecuting attorney services.
Okay, so in that legal expenses information that you had sent over, obviously we don't have that information in here because I believe this was largely 2022 that we've contracted out for those.
That's correct.
And I'm assuming we don't have a ballpark number on how much that's costed us, correct?
Not off the top of my head, but I can follow up and track that down.
Okay. And this is actually going to be for Ms. Melendez. When you talk to these other communities, what were the benefits that they had outlined?
Predominantly what's in your packet. Most of them couldn't think of a con for having it in-house other than the specialized items. For instance, most of the HR people that I spoke with, their in-house counsel couldn't provide a lot of advice on employee relations issues, so that still needed to be contracted out. But largely the benefit of just having them accessible at all times was the biggest benefit for it.
Okay.
And to be clear, I reached out to a lot of municipalities. These were the ones that were closest in size that happened to get back to me. It's very difficult to get a lot of people to respond when we send out these inquiries.
Totally understand. And for either Ms. Melendez or Mr. Fleming, in terms of communities our size, do they typically contract out their town attorney services, or do they have somebody in-house? Is there is there a certain point where they get over a certain size where typically they turn to in-house?
It seemed to be a little bit of a blend of both, but I would say, if I had a guess, and especially based on like the spreadsheet that Malcolm had attached, it seems like right around the 40 to 50,000 for sure is when people start bringing it in-house, but there are obviously examples of smaller communities that bring it in-house.
Okay. I will yield my time, so thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Bell.
Thank you, Mayor. First off, thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Malcolm, for putting this together. It's a lot of information and was very detailed. I appreciate that. So let me start with the annual city attorney survey. So in looking through this, and I'm always somebody that tries to look for the median here. So it looks like kind of on the low end, you've got 190. On the high end, you've got 245, but it seems the 245s from Boulder, and that seems really skewed. You know, if you were to look at a bell curve on this, that they're kind of way at the high end. Alicia, do you know, is part of that maybe just, is there a cost of living adjustment for Boulder? Is that part of?
Yeah, I think it just pay higher wages in that area.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, it seems like everything, just glancing at this median, if I'm throwing out the low, throwing out the high, is somewhere around 215. I guess the other question I have, I mean, when this when I first heard this coming up, I guess the two things that kind of got me thinking about this, and I think Trustee Sawish hit on a bit of this, is one is just that, we're just over 30,000, and we're looking at going to home rule. It seems to me kind of more established municipalities kind of have in-house, and the other part of me that was thinking about this, just as far as like kind of controlling billable hours, and I think we we have a lot of one-off things that is this the I'll just throw out an example because it's something that just came up recently, but when we were trying to get a contract together for the EEDC with the air show, things like that, there was a lot of that got tied up with kind of questions over how this application was going, and so that goes into billable hours. So I guess is that one of the advantages here, that if you have something like that maybe there's questions on it and the attorney has to spend a certain amount of time doing that, you're basically just have a fixed cost, versus in a billable hour situation, you kind of lose your cost control on that.
Well, just if we were to, in my opinion, properly staff an in-house department at this point, that would require, based on this research, it would suggest the need for 3 positions at a cost of about $550,000. And if you look at our contracted costs, it's less than that. So it suggests that at this point anyway, contracting is the most cost-effective route to go.
Okay, so I guess following up on the first point though, is there a point, I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out, obviously, you're looking at, Boulder, Fort Collins, Greeley, Aurora, these are pretty established towns. So like, is that, you talk about the advantage of obviously having somebody there, and somebody that's just down the hall and things like that. Is that mainly, in your opinion, why you see these towns or these cities moving to more of that direction, or is it more cost, or is it?
I think it's probably the volume of activity. At some point, it's either there's enough activity to keep that many people consistently busy, and you still, as Kendra pointed out in her comments, many, even the larger cities, including Aurora, still contract out for certain services if something hits a peak, or they've got an issue that requires a real fast turnaround and they need additional help. But I think when you get into that, whether it's 40,000 or 50,000 or somewhere north of there, you probably have enough general legal services work that can support a department cost effectively.
Okay, thanks. And I guess, yeah, there's obviously that balancing point of figuring out where that line falls. I guess based on what you see coming down the road here, as far as development activity, things of that nature, is that, I mean, do you see an increase possibly in the need for additional legal work, or is it about the same, or kind of forecasting maybe 2-3 years out?
Yeah. Frankly, it's hard to imagine the development activity getting higher than it is right now, or than it has been over the last several years, with multiple large developments all requiring legal review and development agreements and negotiated complex financial arrangements and metro districts that also require some legal review. But looking at that, if you look at that table again, one of the key things I noted was in the attorneys per 10,000 population. You'll see for the smaller jurisdictions, the ratio is higher, and you kind of expect that as the city gets larger, the in-house services can spread, not that population, there's a direct correlation between that and the need for legal services, but there's probably some correlation there. And the smaller jurisdictions tend to have the higher ratio of attorneys per population. And that's, to me, that says, yeah, maybe at the Littleton, Lakewood's it's kind of, attorneys come in lumpy services or lumpy chunks. You hire one and that changes that ratio quite a bit depending what your population is. And it also increases your expenses significantly each time, more than $100,000 each time. So I would think it would continue to be cost effective until we were at the 50 to 60,000 population, or there was some dramatic change in the nature of issues that were subject to legal review. And I mean, over my career, I've seen it get more and more complex. The more federal regulations you have, whether it's for employment issues or all the range of legal issues, it's gotten more legally complex over the years. And I think probably used to be able, a small town could probably get by with one person doing most of the legal work. It's not that way anymore. It's just too complex, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. That's sorry, I do have one final question. This would be for Alicia, and that is obviously the numbers here, their base salary numbers. When we talk about total compensation, because obviously having somebody in-house where they would be getting benefits, can you give a ballpark figure on what that would do for the numbers?
Sure. So one of the charts shows that, like, for instance, if we were to hire a town attorney in at base salary for $211,000 and some change, benefits for that would be about $68,000 additionally, for a total of $279,000 for that. So the fully funded amount that we quoted of $556,163 includes the fully loaded benefits for all three positions coming in at around $138,000.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks. Yes, all that was in the packet. I lost track of which one was first, but
Trustee
okay.
Hoback.
Trustee Hoback.
Okay, then. Thank you. Yeah, as one of the trustees that thought this was a good idea to review, I do think this is the sort of arrangement that should be reviewed every few years by the board. And when the first numbers came out, my gut feeling was that, gosh, that seems awfully low. And that was confirmed by some of my own research that found that an assistant town attorney advertisement in Fort Collins was less than what was quoted, and then your further research obviously has confirmed that, yeah, those were a little on the low side. I think, and then of course there's it's not just the cost, which can be a little soft in terms of, well, we'll still need some outside counsel for this, that, and the other thing. So I think there are a number of other pros and cons that are worthwhile that have been listed out by Kendra and Malcolm and others. And I think at this point, the pros probably outweigh the cons. I don't think we're at the point of having the economies of scale that would warrant a change. we are probably 3 to 5 years away from that. And, perhaps if we end up at home rule, perhaps that would be a good segue into it. But that's my 2 cents at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee. Over to trustee Harris.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd have to agree with trustee Hoback in regard to where we are from a financial perspective. I think having worked in law firms when I was in college and wanting to be an aspiring lawyer and deciding not to and going a different direction. I've worked in small all the way to large law firms, largest in the country. And the amount of expertise that law firms have and their breadth of diversity in terms of what area of practice those law firms have is something that is definitely a positive in regard to that. So when you look at number 4 on the town's attorney assessment of staffing needs, you have their litigation attorneys currently, Pat from her office, Cora, currently Dan from her office, oil and gas attorneys, Barb Green and John Sullivan, special district attorneys, currently her, and specialists in construction defect, Kyle Kreischer, and personnel, including police issues, another one. You're talking 5, 6, 7 attorneys for different areas, specific areas of legal practice. And that's just for things that we've had to deal with, not only in the past 2 years, but historically as a town. And so I think what it does provide is having contracting out is you do have that ability to have attorneys who have different areas of practice, and not just hiring one person in and having maybe a paralegal is not going to cut it. Trust me, it doesn't. From working in law firms and knowing a lot of friends who are lawyers. So I think that it's helpful and provides that flexibility to be able to do it. Now, if you're talking about the value of what our current legal team has provided, I think having been in the legal world, it's a hard profession to be in, but you have to go according to what the law is, and you don't know what what the judge is going to be, or what the juries, or any of that stuff that's going on. So there's a lot of stuff to handle. And so I think having a diverse workforce in the legal area is helpful, instead of having 2 or 3 people and then having to subcontract out. And then that cost is going to be more prohibitively expensive. And then also bringing them in, having a place for them to sit. I do know that Westlaw and all those other research things that you do need is expensive. And so all these costs, after you start unpeeling the layer of the onions, you're going to find it's going to be a lot more than you think. So we can certainly look at it as you get bigger and economies of scale and why they do go in-house. But you're talking about, 60, twice as much as we are now, or even more so than that. And so I think from that perspective, where we are, I think we're in a good place. We can certainly try to ask for certain things and get expectations more clear. I think that's important to do. But I think also the other advantage is, because they also work with other municipalities, even though that may be a disadvantage in terms of time, it's also an advantage because you understand they're dealing with other or maybe similar items as we are. So their ability to be able to grasp that and what other municipalities have done, and looking at best practices and understand, having to go to court with another municipality, with another judge, they'll have a better understanding when they come to us and they say, this is our experience. We've had that in the 2 years that Trustee Bell and I have been on, as well as Trustee Laughlin, we've seen that. And so, they say, well, we dealt with this in another municipality. This is what how this turned out, or this are the things that we learned from that experience that we bring here to Erie. So it's very helpful in that regard that I see. But once, I think when it gets if home rule goes, and then the home rule and that government, the nature of government changes, that is something definitely for them to take a look at and to review. But I do appreciate the due diligence that's been made here in regard to that. So thank you very much for all the work, Ms. Melendez and Ms. Flem and Mr. Fleming for putting this through. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee. Over to trustee Bear.
Thank you. I just want to echo what trustee Hoback and trustee Harrison said. Thank you so much, Alicia, for all this hard work, because it helps us understand, you know, where we're at, and this is something that we should be thinking about. It's something that we will eventually mature into, it looks like. But I agree that we are probably utilizing the residents, the tax money, the tax revenue in a responsible way by contracting out. I think that's what the numbers are showing us. And so thank you, Alicia, for helping us see that. And yeah, I think that this is something that we will likely mature into and should keep on the radar, you know, once years down the road, once we hit some other milestones, but whether that's home rule or 50,000 population or whatever that target is. But yeah, so I agree with trustee Hoback and trustee Harrison.
Okay, thank you for that. Any others? Okay, thank you, Ms. Melendez, for the very detailed packet that you helped prepare, and Mr. Fleming, thank you as well. I won't repeat all that's been said, but I certainly appreciate having data and metrics from which to base decision making. And so I think that is why all of the trustees really were interested in understanding the posture where we are and the potential problem set that we have in terms of managing our costs. I think that if we were to go to full-time services, it would be more convenient. But given all of the other services that we already contract out, I think it would be a much greater net positive expense in a negative way, and may not be the best use of our taxpayer funds at this point. As complexity and projects grow, I would not be surprised at all if this needs to get revisited, as with many other things that come along with growth. So I appreciate trustee Sawish for proposing that we discuss this topic. It was certainly something that we needed to be informed about, and I think we learned a great deal from the data provided. So thanks again.
Thank you.
So that is the end of our topics for the study session. I did have one item I wanted to bring up that I want to kind of gauge sentiment of the board as to how we want to proceed. There are currently 3 boards and commissions that have vacancies on them. A couple due to resignations, and I think one due to trustee Hoback moving to the Board of Trustees. So the Planning Commission had let me back up. So we fairly recently went through our rankings for all the boards and commissions. So we still have that data available to us to like the next tier or next available candidate that we could choose from. The Planning Commission has a unique requirement in that anyone who is appointed to the Planning Commission must be interviewed. So I requested that Ms. Stamp reach out to all of the candidates that were on those 3 advisory boards or commissions that have a vacancy to see if those next candidates are still interested in serving. And she heard back from some, but not all of them. We could go one of a couple of ways. We could go with the next available candidate that's engaged in responding to us, and save the trouble of having to go back through the selection process. And for the Planning Commission, that would involve a round of interviews and then ranked choice voting on the candidate and then making our appointment. So that could be a couple of meetings worth of activity. The others, we don't necessarily have to have interviews. We would just have to review the applications and make a decision. So that could just be a line item on on an agenda for an upcoming meeting. And so I wanted to just open for discussion. Is there an appetite for more full-blown process for all three of these commissions to fill the three spots, or selecting from the applications that we already have been submitted?
So Mayor, this is Debbie. Can I just interject for a second?
Please do.
So on next Tuesday's meeting, we have on the consent agenda, we have an item to appoint an HPAB member, Historic Preservation Advisory Board member. The way that it works for the other boards is the board members review the applications and they make their recommendation to you. So their recommendation is coming next week on the consent agenda. And that's how we do it for all the other boards. Planning Commission is the one board that needs interviews. So we do have the one candidate who was interviewed and has said that he's interested in serving, but we have another candidate who was not interviewed and says he is interested in serving as well. So we would have to go through interviewing him and then deciding between the two, or you could just appoint the one that you did interview that didn't get selected. That's the way we could do that one.
Sure.
But the
So,
HPAB is, the HPAB one is coming next week.
HPAB is on the consent, but is there also, I thought sustainability also had a vacancy.
We do. We're still working on that one.
Okay.
And we'll be coming forward with that one soon too.
Okay, so we're really just talking about whether to accept the one applicant that's been interviewed or open full reapplication interviews for Planning Commission. Any preference? Anyone hard over with just selecting from the previously interviewed candidates?
How long ago was it that we did how long ago was it that applications had to be received for the Planning Commission? And Ms. Stampy might know this answer.
I don't know the specific date they were due. I don't remember that date, but you interviewed these applicants on May 3rd of this year.
I believe it was April 15th, if I remember right.
I believe you're correct. Now that you say that, I believe you're correct.
Okay, so it's been almost 6 months. I mean, this is, Trustee Harrison, Trustee Hoback, and myself, being from the Planning Commission, the Planning Commission is a different animal than all the other ones that we have. This is one where I'd lean towards doing it by the book and having the application process and, interviewing a few, just so that we do it the correct way, just because it is a quasi-judicial body.
Well, are you saying that the book just says that an interview has to be done? It doesn't say anything about there being an expiration date on the application. Are you suggesting that the notion of picking the next available candidate is somehow outside of our process?
I think typically in the past we have reopened the process.
Yeah.
So
we reopen that when there's a vacancy. We reopen the process. We interview whomever applies, and then, if I remember correctly, I'm trying to think. We would take a look at it, and then we would provide who we thought suggestions, and then give those to the board, and then they would go and interview those candidates, or pick and choose who they want to interview. So my view is, if it's been 6 months, things are changed. We only have one person, another person's outside of it. I think we should interview them.
I kind of like that idea of putting it also to the Planning Commission, basically saying, say we get 9 applications, say draw it down to this number, we'll interview and select, one from that number.
Right. Yeah, I think we did, I can't remember, your top 3 or top 4, something like that. And then we interviewed them. And so that way you keep it balanced in that regard. And your Planning Commission has a say, because they know the work and they know what's going on. Granted, Trustee Sawich, Hoback, and I have that experience, but things change, And so they have different dynamics on the board.
So just to clarify one more thing, we only have 2 of the applicants that have responded to me questioning whether they'd still be interested. So we'd have to open up a whole new recruitment period.
Yeah. And there wasn't any, was there a particular deadline as to when they were supposed to respond by of interest, or when you contacted them, they were like, hey, yeah, I'm interested. No, I'm out.
I gave them like 2 weeks to respond to my email. And I got one over this weekend, and the other one came within the first week. So yeah.
Well, I mean, 2 weeks. I think that's long enough to try to gauge responses from those people who had done it before. And so if you all are in agreement, I'm happy with bringing that other new person in for an interview. And the other individual, I think we have that. Do we have that? Is that a recorded interview that we did with the other individual, Debbie?
I'm sure it is if we were all on it.
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not quite sure where it is at this moment, but his name is Jeff Tolson, and he is the one who you did interview him. And he was one of
So I would say that we follow the same process, same questions, that kind of thing. We already can look back at Jeff's interview, and then we can also, and then do the same thing for this person. So that it's on equal footing, we can evaluate.
So those prior interviews are available online that I can look up, because I'll be at a disadvantage because I was not part of those.
Right. Sure.
Yep. I think I tried to watch them, and it was very disjointed because people didn't show up. So
just a warning, it was one really long interview video, so it's going to be like a 3-hour video, I think.
So Debbie, find that one person.
I'll try and find the minute that person started. And the other option is to also interview this other person. And if you decide that neither one of them should be appointed, you can open the recruitment process at that point as well.
Agreed. Yep, that makes sense. I think that's the most efficient way to go. What does everybody else think?
I'm a fan for efficiency.
I would probably go for the next in line, but get it done. But I'm not. No,
I still turn to opening it back up, just again because it is a QJ body. That's the largest, rationale behind that.
Talk more about that, Trustee. With it being a QJ body versus any other. What's your concern there?
I mean, by statute, they have the same vested powers by statute for land planning, zoning, use, everything like that. The same criteria we hold for our application QJ reviews are what they have to do. So, I mean, my thought is it could be, it's been 6 months and we might get a different.
No, I guess I was asking, speak more specifically about, since it's a QJ body, you're more concerned about that concern. What do you, the Planning Commission is chartered to review applications against the UDC and the comprehensive plan. Their scope is sort of limited to that. So why would you be concerned about that one versus others?
Just so we can make sure that we do it by the book. I mean, yeah, we did interview the other individual. If we are going to have the consideration of the other individual who responded, obviously we'd have to interview them. 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other.
And legal perspective, and I know that you can't serve on more than one board, obviously. Would there be people who had interviewed for Planning Commission before and now are appointed to another board?
Yep.
Yes.
There are. Several.
That board.
And I did speak to a couple of them, and all of them would prefer to stay on the board they're on. So
Ah, they find life
Those are-
easier, less time commitment.
Well, what? So, oh, you mean that in the respect that you're saying they'd rather stay where they're at now than.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, sounds like they would
Okay.
understand.
So then what does that limit us to? One?
You have two. You have
You have
one
two.
person that was interviewed and he was in the final 6. So when you rank choice voted, he was in that ranking. He just came out at the bottom. So he just didn't make it to the, to the board. And so, and the others that didn't make it were appointed to other boards as well. And so those ones that were appointed to other boards would rather just stay with those boards.
Okay, I got you. All right.
And the one that you did interview, he did tell me that he has been engaged in more community stuff since then. So he kind of has gotten his feet in the water is basically what he's told me. So.
Okay.
Right. Well, I think that it sounds like it would be really efficient for us to go ahead and interview this new person who's interested. And we can either go off of Mr. Tolson's interview or it may be equitable to interview him again. I'm also open to that. But that makes sense to me to sort of look at these two people, these two interested parties. And then if it's not a good fit, then open the whole process. That seems like an efficient way to do that.
Yeah, I like that. Because I think before we did 6 interviews for just the planning commission, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So, seeing if we can get it resolved in an hour with 2 interviews versus 6 hours off the bat, I think would be okay. Any concern with that process being the one we follow?
So we would re-interview, correct?
Yes. So we'd re-interview Mr. Tolson and the other candidate who went through the ranked choice voting the previous time. And if we feel comfortable making a choice with one of those 2 candidates, then we make the appointment based on that. If after interviewing the 2 candidates, we feel like neither choice would be sufficient for the opening, then we would open up applications to the entire community.
Sounds like a good plan.
And
Fair.
and then that
Are
would
we-
result in interviews and an appointment from there.
Are we allowed to put time parameters around these interviews so that we can keep them reasonable?
Yes, we did before. I think they were half-hour interviews, if I'm not mistaken.
You
Right.
want 3 hours each person, Trustee Hovick?
Exactly.
I'd rather not.
And I think we also, it worked out that we had each trustee ask 2 questions, I think it was, and that was enough time for us to get through the entire interview, if I'm not mistaken. Ms. Stamp will keep us honest, though.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'll work with Malcolm and Ms. Stamp to get that scheduled and get it going so we can get those vacancies filled. When we were getting the updates from all the boards and commissions, it was something that I had on my to-do list, but it had just gotten out prioritized for other things, and it's certainly something we want to make sure that they're all equipped to do their business without risk of being in a deadlock tie. Another topic that has come up that was pointed out was that there have been some boards and commissions who have had trouble with their liaison being present. So I'm not sure if that's just our calendars not being populated or the primary liaison not deconflicting and making sure we're coordinated with the backup. But let's try to make sure we're covering. I know there are a ton of internal as well as external boards that we all have to cover. So let's just try and communicate as early as possible where there's conflict so that we can avoid leaving volunteers in the lurch waiting for us.
Yep.
So on the same breath, we're also seeing some, if you will, attendance issues or some of the bodies where they aren't meeting quorum. So this is something that we also need to address because obviously we look to them to carry out those various functions. They are volunteers. I completely understand that, but obviously we need to recognize that to do their business, they need to have quorum. So
Are they,
And
are the other meetings, are they all physical as well, or are they virtual?
it varies by board. Some are meeting face to face. I think most are virtual.
We have three virtual and 3 in person. So
And are the ones that are trouble meeting quorum, are they the in person or are they the virtual?
it's both.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
both.
They can't get on their laptop?
I think there's a rule, and I don't know if it's like if it's a scheduling thing. If people are having to remember that they have a meeting on certain days, or if that's planned and put in their inbox for them. I'm not sure how we're handling that.
And the one thing that they're not real clear on is if you don't have a quorum, according to Kendra, you can't discuss anything other than rescheduling that meeting if you choose to. That is what Kendra has said. You can't just have a discussion. It's not about, making a quorum to make decisions. You can't do anything other than reschedule that meeting if you don't have a quorum. That's what she has said.
Right.
Yeah. It's pretty restrictive. I think there's also a rule in our boards and commissions that if you miss like 3 meetings, the chair of the board can remove you. So if they're having frequent absences, we should make sure they know they're empowered to request replacement members.
Yes.
And I think that's I believe that's subjective. I don't think it's required, but it's a tool that they have at their disposal. Okay, that's those weren't on the agenda, but those are just things that you guys were targets of opportunity, and it was early enough for us to maybe get a couple things out. Tomorrow night I will be virtual, but I will be on the phone. I'll be joined via Zoom, so I'll see you, but you won't see me. But I'm looking forward to a great discussion with Lafayette, especially the mobility thing mobility topic that we were talking about earlier. Getting that extended into Erie would be amazing if we could work that out. Of course, within budget and within reason, but that's something I'm excited to talk about.
So for those of you who will be there, dinner's at 5 o'clock in Lafayette at their city hall. Park on the west side of the building and see you there.
So I may be a few minutes late getting there. I'm coming straight from work, so unfortunately I won't be able to be there for dinner, but.
And are we starting at 6 p.m. tomorrow? Is that the go live time?
5:30 is the start time.
5:30.
5:30. All right. 5:30.
I had Dr. Cog meeting scheduled for tomorrow, and Boulder Consortium of Cities working, man. It's like a popular time. I can't go to those other 2 meetings, so this is more important right now. So I let them know.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks everybody.
All right.
Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Bye.